in a perfect world, we are currently live. I'm just going to make sure everything is behaving. We're good on Twitch. Should be good on YouTube. I should have had the tab
I'm checking
open.
myself on this side too, and it appears to be starting, pinging up. My face has arrived. That is a bad sign for everyone out there.
Good. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lorebeards. This week, we're starting off with something a little different. I have to show y'all something.
You don't.
So Andy Law has been playing Baldur's Gate 3 over on his Twitch account at LAWhammer, and you may be thinking, "Oh, that's kind of cool, but why do I care?" And I'm going to show you why you should care, because if you go follow him on Twitch and YouTube, but if you go follow him on Twitch, especially you were streaming this on YouTube simultaneously.
Yeah, it's on YouTube as well now.
Yeah,
figuring out how to do the both of them.
Yeah, so you get to see parts like this.
I'm tempted to do the performance because I'm a thespian, don't you know? Yes, it's me. Let me in. Let me do my performance check, but I don't want to fail this one, so I'm going to drop a little bit of extra guidance on it. Roll that dice. I'm really glad that I did. Is it enough? Oh, that was close.
Amazing.
Oh, it was close.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, make sure you go check that out so you can catch awesome stuff like that.
I tend to get involved with any game that I play.
Listen, my only issue is why hasn't that voice for a character appeared yet in LAWhammer? That's my only complaint.
We haven't had the opportunity to have him arrive yet.
How is that? That should have been Lady Noct.
Well, that would have been one hell of an act.
All right. Anyway, so I was hoping for a nat 1. It's okay. He rolled a nat 1 on his very first roll of his playthrough.
My very first roll was a nat 1.
It was excellent.
I moved into the second stream that I did this morning, and I was like, "Oh, let's see how this one goes." And no time at all, I won again. I've not scored a single natural 20 yet. Not one.
I think I had 3 nat 20s on my first playthrough.
What a thing. And yes, I do impressions of people as we go along. I literally can't help myself. I'm sitting there because I like to copy accents. I do it badly, but I have fun.
All right, so we're here for a reason, which is not
the real reason we're here. Yeah,
which is not to talk about Baldur's Gate 3, as tempting as that is. So this week, due to community vote, we are discussing the Hags of Kislev, which is probably almost assuredly going to branch out into other Kislevite topics. But first of all, thank you all for voting. And second of all, let's just go ahead and hop right into it. So obviously the Hags of Kislev are a pretty hot topic right now with the reveal of Mother Ostenkia and all the shenanigans that are coming with her. She has not quite had her feature week yet. I imagine they're going to be saving her for last because she's kind of the most unique of the characters that are being introduced. However, Andy, a lot of that is very near and dear to him because he wrote a lot of it.
I did. So, without starting at any particular point, way back in the midst of time, which is often how it starts with me, when the world was young, but actually it wasn't that young, it was the second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I was a part of a team that was to reimagine Kislev and bring it to a new audience. And we had a variety of material to draw upon, very little of which felt particularly Warhammer, particularly the older stuff from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The primary source, for want of a better word, was Gavthorpe's Kislev army list, which had been created for Warhammer. And it was scant on details. Beyond that, we had the old Empire army list from 4th edition Warhammer, which was ancient, and then a variety of 1st edition sources and the occasional mention here and there. Plus, we also had the new versions of Kislev that had been half presented in Wartime and half presented in Warmaster. So we had to try and collate all of that together into something new. And the easiest thing to do would have been to just repeat that. And it would have provided us with enough material to make a pretty interesting book. However, it wouldn't have done service to the setting that was hinted at throughout all of the books. By this point, we had a variety of fun novels. And I mentioned this in one of our previous streams. We had Riders of the Dead, for example, by Dan Abnett. We had Graham McNeil's novels that presented a slightly different version of Kislev again for the Ambassador Chronicles. And if you didn't know, the good old titular or the eponymous Ambassador is actually kind of based on Sean Connery. Just in case you didn't know there. So if you wish, you can, if you read those books, you can imagine him going, yes, yes, yes. And similar all the way through.
I didn't need that mental image, but all right.
I've now ruined the books for you. So that's the Ambassador Chronicles, which I really liked. So we had all of this material. And almost all of it, as was often the case with Warhammer material in particular, was focused on the top end. And the top end of Kislev were the Gospodars. They were the ruling, not just class, they were the ruling people, because they had invaded Kislev approximately 1,000 years ago and pushed everybody else back. Now, the reason for their invasion at this point was not clear. The effects of what this had had upon the local peoples and what the empire had looked like before that at that point was not clear. So it was our job to fix all of that. But one thing in particular was massively underserved, and that was the Ungauls. Now, the Ungauls had been described at length in various places, but they'd never really had much additional detail provided. Now, the Ungauls are not the Gospodars. Let's make a couple of things really clear right from the beginning. The Gospodars are what everyone imagines with these tall, Kislevite, blonde, red-haired, sometimes black-haired, very white-looking peoples. Where if you look at the Ungauls, they were very different. If you want to get some sort of real world comparison, they're much more close to Mongolians in terms of how they were presented. Their ethnicity was very different indeed. They were all dark haired. They all had a darker skin color and tone as well. They were a shorter people. They were a rougher people, and they've been dealing with the chaos hordes coming from Norska for a long time. And they were tough people, difficult to push back, but they got pushed back, and the ones that got pushed back did not like it. And over the course of the next 1,000 years, they become almost a secondary part of Kislev. So that was what we had to pick up with. We had ourselves two groups of people, one of which was an oppressed people, the other of which was the oppressor. And we were in a position where we had a clear set of witches for the oppressors, which were the ice witches. And we had a quite clear tone for how they should be presented. Although, when I sat down and I recreated them, I changed them relatively significantly. But there was nothing for the Ungauls at all. They had the horse archers. Kislevite horse archers were all Ungauls. They had stanistas, that was communities that were entirely Ungaul with their own rotas, that's groups of people, a circle, a rota, that were working from them. They had their Kossars, they had their people from the steppe, but they didn't have the winged lancers because they were obviously from the Gospodars. They didn't have all the big, tall, muscled, and armored folk. These were all low income, leathered clad, heavy furred warriors with bows, but exceptionally good horsemen. But no magic at all, which made literally no sense because they were the peoples that were facing off against the Chaos Hordes again and again and again. So we went and dived into all the existing lore that we had for Kislev, and there was nothing really there to dive into. So instead, we dived into the broader lore for Eastern Europe. And I don't just mean Russia. I don't just mean the various other countries that sit around it. I mean just the Eastern European blanket area in general. And took what we could from that as a starting point. And the number of legends of, let's just pull out the one obvious one, Baba Yaga. But the number of legends of old witches doing things, not just in Eastern Europe, but from Germany over, your Hansels and Gretels and the ugly witches that lay on the inside. So we wanted to subvert some of those tropes, because the immediate thing that you think of when you jump on these ancient, horrendous, evil witches that live in the forest that are out to eat your children or somehow pervert your men by taking on a glamour and appearing like a young woman and making babies with them and ruining marriages, or whatever other story you go for as they carve people up into various ways, is to view them as the bad guy. And given that he was with the oppressed people, that was the perfect place to begin by saying that that is a lie. It's not true. That the hags, as they eventually came to be called, although they don't call themselves hags, they called themselves the wise women. The circles, the rotas, the small krugs that sat in there, of wise women that advised the communities, were probably single-handedly responsible for ensuring that the depredations of chaos did not affect the Ungauls, and more importantly, did not affect the Empire, because they were part of that large buffer, that defense network that lay between Troll Country and Norska and what came afterwards. So the next job was, who the fuck are these guys? Exactly how does it work? And we relatively early decided that the Ungauls had some quite clear gendered roles. Men were considered to be the fighters. Women were considered to be the brains in many respects, although both sides would often argue that it was the opposite. So the circles of wise women, they were there and they were elevated. And why they were so important was because they all had the sight. They could all see, but they could see in a way that no other witches pretty much in the old world could, because they could see chaos. They could see its actual effect on others. Their sight was slightly more attuned, but that was for the more trained ones. Every single Ungaul girl that had the sight would be taken aside and would get interviewed by the circle of wise women. And those that were seen to have the proper sight would be inducted into the wise women. So every single one of these wise women had the sight. They had the ability to see the winds of magic. They had the ability to see, most importantly, spirits. Now, what the wise women could do that pretty much no other magic channelers across the old world could do was figure out how to do magic without touching the winds of magic itself. In many respects, you could argue that they're doing something similar to the dwarves. The dwarves are channeling the winds of magic through their runic items and through the skills that they have to put the winds of magic into material objects. They do it with a different way. They persuade, cajole, make deals with, and otherwise have pacts with spirits. The more powerful, the more ancient the wise women, the more spirits that they're able to draw. When a hag is at its most powerful, when a wise woman's at her most powerful, is when the most spirits are about them, not when the winds are strongest. In any other type of magic, you've got the winds waxing and waning all over the place, and you get bonuses or you get negatives about how much wind there is in the area. Not the case for the hags. They didn't use the winds of magic at all. The spirits did it on their behalf. The spirits were the ones that were working all of their magic, but they didn't do it for free. Because why would they? It came at a cost, and a big cost. And that cost was their youth. They pretty much sucked their life out of the wise women. Now, not all of the wise women were capable of doing magic, but those few that could actually affect the spirits were the ones that, perhaps seeing it as a curse, would lose their youth. Sometimes those who suffered a great loss, those who were widowed, for example, particularly because it's directly related to the spirits of the ancient widow, they would be almost granted the power by the spirits, but in turn, they took the youth away. Wise woman in her 40s might look like she's in her 80s if she's able to affect the spirits. An old, proper hag will look like she's well past her hundreds, teeth that are black, skin hanging off her flesh, fingers dripping down, skin hanging from her in blackened clumps. They're disgusting. Truly horrible entities. If you take a look at, for example, how this has been interpreted for the Mother Ostenkia version of it, she is, by comparison, an almost a young witch. If you take the look at the visuals in comparison to how it was originally imagined, they have decided to go for a far more, let's say, genteel example of it. She just looks like an average old woman with a couple of little details. Take a look. My teeth are a bit funny. My claws are a bit off. Where the hag mothers, the really old ones, because for all they take their youth, they don't take their vitality, and they never let them die until they actually die. Some of the oldest, like the sea hag, is said to be well over 1,000 years old herself, possibly 2,000. She's proper ancient, and she lives beneath the bottom of the ocean and is probably the most disgusting thing that anyone has seen in their life, because every time she works her magic, the spirits take something else from her. So, cut a long story short, as our quick introduction, the hags were created to be an Ungol representation of the Ice Witches of Kislev, so that the Ungols had something that they could balance off on their side, because we wanted to make sure that the Realms of the Ice Queen was not just the book about the Gospodars. It was a book about two peoples, an oppressed people and an oppressing people. And these two peoples working together sometimes, not working together other times, but both of which had an outside enemy that most certainly would destroy them all. Chaos. And often they had to work together, but often they literally hated each other. And the hags in particular were pitched as bad guys, often by the Gospodars, but in truth were the ones that had the true understanding of chaos in a way that no others did, were not immune to it, just like no one else is immune to it, but were fully aware when they themselves could fall, because they could see it within themselves, because they had a sight quite like anyone else. Most importantly, though, as a nice finish to this somewhat preambly long chat to get us going, the hags were given one power that no one else in the entire game was given. It was a unique power, and that was the power to, under certain unique circumstances, remove mutation.
Yes.
And that was done for more reasons than just it fit thematically for the hags, which it did. But it's also because it's a roleplay game, and sometimes you get a PC with a mutation, and it's always good to have an epic quest to try and get rid of that thing. And the epic quest in this case was, let's hike our way all the way to Kislev, go past all the major cities, into the wilds, into the open oblast in the snows, hike out to a tiny little village, be told about an ancient Baba somewhere or another who's somewhere else in the forest, surrounded by spirits, and some of those spirits are truly awful. Hike your way to her and then get her to say, yeah, it's all right, I'll sort that out for you. What would be the cost? And remember, of all people, the hag witches understand cost.
Yes. So, Mr. Vorn, yep, you got it. You figured out the Ungols and the Ropesmen in a lot of ways, I think. Michael, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Hey. There's a lot of different things there to pick apart. There's a lot in there, and I'm gonna just do my job and start plucking at strings. And for anyone watching, I know a lot of y'all are very excited about Total War. We will be addressing how these things intersect.
Oh, absolutely.
We're gonna get through more of the classic lore, and then we'll meander our way into the game, because there's a lot of differences there. And something that I think Andy has said a lot, and I talk about a lot, is when we're dealing with Total War, we have to understand that we have to get through a filter to get to the game, because the game can't represent everything faithfully. It just can't. It has to make sacrifices in order to make a possible game. So we'll work our way to that. I see a lot of comments about it. Don't worry. We'll get there. But first, we got to understand what we're working with first. So I think the most important thing to talk about, because it came up a number of times, is you mentioned words. You talked about that the hags seem to have a lot of really unique powers. They have a unique ability to see chaos. They have a unique ability to interact with chaos, and to be able to interact with the winds or magic itself through this very specific relationship that, from what we've seen of the Warhammer world, does not appear to be anywhere else, at least in the old world. So the question is, why? Where does that come from? What is the origin of that power? Who gave that to them?
So there is purposely written a great deal of vagueness here. because there are certain things that you want to answer in the lore, and there's certain things that you want to leave open for other people to potentially take in different directions anyway in the future. As you, for example, Total War took everything in a very different direction for the needs of their game, and you'll find that when the old world comes along, they'll take everything in a different direction as well. And much of what we understand as established lore will become very quickly old, as it will be replaced with something new. So you always try to leave space for that, because the more vague you write, the more likely it is that the next generation comes along and goes, oh, I really like this idea that's been left open. I'm going to do this with it, which means that it gets expanded into something new, and it doesn't invalidate what came before. Instead, it adds to it. But there was certain things put in place. Number one, their magic is old. Their magic comes from, we're talking pre-Sigmar times with the Ungol tribes. The Ungol tribe in particular did not answer the call to Sigmar. Sigmar did a big call out to all the tribes that were inside the Reich Basin and beyond. And that's right up to the World's Edge Mountains, up to almost Troll Country, all the way over to the edge of Bretonnia by Corone. That entire area, as far as Sigmar was concerned, was something that he could draw upon when he went to help High King Kurgan at Blackfire Pass. The Ungols were one of the tribes that refused that call, and forever were on the outside of the Empire because of this. And they were, because of this, when we were discussing it, very much given a far more independent nature, a far stronger independent streak. They also had their own problems. And their own problems spawned from the fact that they were sitting on the border with, well, chaos. The realms of chaos are not so far away to the north. Not necessarily a good thing for them. But beyond that also, they were protecting something. And this is the big what. And that thing was always left relatively vague. The ancient widow, Mother Kislev, the motherland, the mother, the land, whatever you wish to call it. Some form of entity that was filled with grief. One of the reasons the word widow was used repeatedly. Absolutely filled with grief, and an entity that is directly related to two things in particular. One, cold. Her heart is frozen, completely and utterly dead in some respects. And two, spirits of a variety of different kinds. And that was put in place for a mixture of reasons, many of which were tied to the sources that we were drawing from across Eastern Europe. But the spirit aspect was super important. If you take a look at the Hags rules as they were presented in 2nd edition, for example, they could very easily pick up spirit familiars, and they would be spirits that you recognize from the game today. Dryads, for example, one of the spirits that a hag might have as just one of their familiars. Naiads, spites, smaller spirits, bigger spirits, and the older hag mothers, truly massive spirits of the land that represent, well, you name it, they could probably have it correlated to them. So the first question is, do they get the power from Mother Kislev? And the answer is, in this case, not really. What they have done is they found a method of using Mother Kislev's spirits, perhaps with her approval, perhaps to help her, perhaps she's frozen, perhaps she's even Arianka, if you wish, as has been posited by more than one potential theory. I purposefully did not want that answered in the lore.
As a quick aside, for those who don't know, who or what is Arianka?
I was about to say, yes. Arianka was originally a goddess of law, and that is almost heretical by modern Warhammer standards. Where originally, when Warhammer was first created, it had both gods of chaos and gods of law. It was copying Michael Moorcock's cosmology directly. Michael Moorcock was an author throughout the course of the 60s up to now who wrote a variety of books that are basically, oh, this is what Warhammer's based on. I thought it was something else. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize. And chaos and law were directly lifted from him and dropped down. The whole concept of beastmen have come from there. Mutants come from there. The whole concept of the chaos gods and how they work come from there. And the gods of law were the opposite of the gods of chaos, the gods of entropy, the gods of decay. On the other side, it was the gods of static nothing. And Arianka was a goddess of light, who was frozen in place inside a crystal casket, and was often deemed as nothing more than an adventure hook for a bunch of parties to go and try and rescue. Let's go rescue the goddess Arianka in Kislev. That'll be fun. Now, that goddess, for a while, Games Workshop weren't sure if it was even a name they could use, because it was originally added by an author who had written a bunch of comics about Caleb Dark, that was his own little miniature, who was a chaos god called Malal, a 5th chaos power that got dropped by Games Workshop, not because they wanted to drop it. He was the chaos god that wanted to kill chaos, but because they didn't know if they owned it. They didn't know if they could use it, and indeed they didn't. So they kind of couldn't. But through time, oh, here we go. Interesting thought. Yeah. Well,
it's kind of an interesting theory.
I got an interesting theory. No clue if there's any lore basis. Would it work that Cade used the Widowmaker to make the widow, making her heart cold, freezing Kislev? I'm not saying I like that. Yeah, totally. Yeah, in my head, definitely. But that was never written into lore. I think it's not just a great idea. I think it's an idea.
Would explain that would be a really cool origin story for the name of that sword.
Yeah, totally. So I was going to finish off on a thing there. Arianka, she is a goddess of law, but she's been brought back into the lore in a variety of small places. In Realm of the Ice Queen, for example, she was mentioned as a goddess who might be lying beneath Prague. And there was a little aside about trips, the little almost tourist trips that were taken from various dodgy people, taking people down to see Arianka.
Down to the catacombs.
This is the real Arianka.
Follow the signs. Follow the signs.
Yeah, totally. But
walls
that's
will eat you.
reinforcing the fact that the legend is very real there. And the loose, gentle tie between the potential Arianka as the ancient widow is definitely intentional. That was always meant to be the point. Arianka, the goddess that's frozen, the goddess that's trapped in the casket, consider almost a Snow White-like character, waiting inside that glass casket to be rescued by someone. Alternatively, their own purpose, because she herself is sad.
Yeah, we have supposedly, maybe, perhaps, deep beneath Prague, which would become an extra troubling thought when you think about what happened to Prague.
Exactly.
Being that, Chaos literally bombed it into the realm of chaos, the poor bastards, down there in the depths. That's maybe one source for this ability, this legend. Then walk us through what is the difference between. Okay, so let's touch on probably the other two big ones, which are the idea of Mother Kislev, or the motherland, and then the ancient widow as kind of entities. Yeah. Which is, I know that's a very difficult dividing line.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, I would say, if you want to view it, let's go to the real world and think of the old Catholic Church and its triumvirate of, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Okay, here we've got Arianka, the ancient widow, and over on this side, Mother Kislev. And are they just the same thing, just seen through 3 different lenses? Are they basically one and the same, or are they 3 separate things? So Arianka is sitting in the center of Prague, and indeed, just to answer the point that you said about nuking it, it's why that was the reason that we sort of had behind the scenes for why chaos kept on going down through Kislev more than any other, because they were after what was sitting in Prague. In the same way that they keep on going for Middenheim, because they're after the Flame of Ulrich. In the same way that they keep on going for the Shrine of Azurin, because of the Flame of Azurin. Each one of these are exceedingly important points, and Prague was one of them. Anyway, that aside, the Mother Kislev, we were so vague, and you'll find that people have added on it later. But loosely, Mother Kislev was often given to the more frozen side. So the
it comes off more as like a kind of classic guardian more entity, though not as benevolent as many guardian entities.
No,
because that's something I think worth touching on as well, is that regardless of which of these entities you think it may be, or if it's all of them or whatever, Kislev is not, and nothing about it is really compassionate.
No.
It is a cold land in literally every sense of the word.
Yeah, and just to whatever it is that's under there, whether it is some great frozen demon, which is one potential. There was discussions behind the scenes, for example, that it was effectively the 9th wind of magic, but trapped outside the gate. And the demon that was responsible for that left the gates and purposefully grounded itself through a rebellion. You know how much the demons love to rebel against their gods.
Mhm.
Happens all the time. And there was talk about that, not in any real sense of this is what it is. It was just oh yeah, there's that, and oh yeah, there's that.
It's a possibility. Yep.
Yeah, the same way that we're discussing it right now. So it wasn't discussed in a this is what it is. It was discussed in a it could be this, it could be that. And this frozen heart that lay in the center called to one of the tribes of chaos, the Gospodars, because they lived out on the open steppe. And basically convinced them that they weren't a tribe of chaos. What they were was actually a really stubborn tribe that followed her, which is a completely different thing, and summoned them over the World's Edge Mountains, which sounds like it might take not too long, but literally took generations of warfare.
Yes, but okay, back to what is Mother Kislev?
So it's see, this is one I've always found harder to pin down. The Ancient Widow's much easier because
let's do her first then. Let's do her
the
first.
Ancient Widow, as she was originally pitched, was not the source necessarily of the cold and the ice that lies within Kislev, but probably is. And the Ancient Widow is a harsh, bleak, mournful entity that lives in the heart of Kislev and is responsible for the enormous amount of spirits there. The spiritual activity in Kislev is far higher than it is in the Empire. And the Empire is already, not exactly spiritually dead. But there are spirits everywhere. And everybody's aware that you don't go into the forest. You don't go out into the Oblast. You don't go over here. Not unless you've got people who understand what's going on there. And that's what the Hags did. They were, in many respects, the walking, talking shield against the absolute ire of the Ancient Widow, who was potentially horrendous if you crossed her. And the people of Kislev were considered to be her people as long as you didn't cross them. The Ancient Widow was generally always more tied to the Ungals in terms of where she sat. And that's how she was pitched, where Kislev, or the motherland and all the rest, was very much pitched on the other side, and less strength was put on the Widow's side when we were discussing it there, and much more strength was put on the Gospodars themselves and the characters and strength that they themselves epitomized, their stubbornness, the fact that they themselves considered themselves the bastion against chaos that lay up to the north. They always thought of themselves as a blessed people. They had been called by the mother to this land to protect it. They were a living embodiment of her will. This was a special, important land that had to be guarded, and it was frozen to its heart. When you go to, say, for example, the great claws of Ursun that rise up out, that's actually a site not to Ursun, but to the to Mother Kislev herself, frozen to its very heart. And that's where, for example, in the Ambassador Chronicles, that the Ice Queen herself goes to channel the most possible, let's say, ice wind, for want of a better description, to channel all of that, to hold back an entire chaos horde pretty much by herself. Good job, that girl.
Yeah.
Nicely done. And does an enormous ritual, and she does it there because that's where the mother herself almost feels like is residing, although it got conflated with Ursun because of the various religions that were kicking around. But loosely, on one side, Ancient Widow, mean, fucking awful, and spirits, and on the other side, frozen, cold, protect the land, special. But it's but you can it gets taken in new directions later.
Yeah, and also for anyone that's like, these sound cool, I want to do further readings, for the love of God, go find the Realm of the Ice Queen. It's very easy to find these days. There's a ton of amazing stuff in there. Yeah, so there's a lot. So we have these three entities. I know I am always, though I am a genuine believer that all three of them exist simultaneously, I am always a very big Ancient Widow stan. I love the Ancient Widow. For anyone that ever has the opportunity to pick up Realm of the Ice Queen, it has artwork of her in it. Or, well, there is a spell the Hags can use to turn into her aspect, and it is, the Ancient Widow is literally a horror movie monster. She is not. You do not want to screw with the Ancient Widow.
What the Hags become is the Ancient Widow in many respects. The more they use the spirit magic, the more they become like her. until the ones who've been using it for longest become the most horrific entities. We're looking at the proper old Baba Yaga legends with long iron claws and horrible teeth that are black and oozing with pus, and eyes that are wicked and gleam out from heavy, massive eyebrows. Truly awful creatures.
Yeah, and there's
good guys.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is that there's a lot of really interesting things there. Of they are this force that stands opposed to chaos, despite the fact that it itself is a horrific force. You know, a lot of people are used to the idea, I think, that in Warhammer Fantasy, that the things that tend to oppose chaos are more like pretty or good or natural, but there are other forces out there that are significantly darker and also do not like chaos at all.
Yeah.
And I think that would be probably the next really interesting question is, from your perspective of looking for the hags specifically, what is their relationship of why for a force that they themselves can be very nightmarish and nasty, and they're working with spirits, many of whom are very sinister, and are not that different from demons. Where is that line for them?
Okay,
of an acceptable force versus a chaos force.
Clear. Yeah, very, very clear. And this isn't even a slight boundary that you'd go, oh, do we have shades of grey here? There are no shades of grey to them in terms of what is and what isn't. And it's relatively easy to see. So before I go on to that, I will say one thing. We were very keen to subvert the standard tropes. I was very keen. Let's be honest. I was writing this bit. I was very keen to subvert the standard trope that ugly means bad. And let's just make that as clear as we possibly can, because it's a standard trope in Hollywood movies. It's a standard trope in almost anything nowadays. And in some respects, you can even see that with the most recent iteration of how the hags are being presented, where she's really quite all right in the greater scheme of things. She's not that ugly. It's not that bad.
Andy, there's a joke I could make at your expense right now. I'm not going to. I just want you to know it's there.
Right. So anyway, the dividing line. What is the difference between the impending, perverting, horrendous, corrupting chaos hordes and a storm? And there lies the difference. One is a force of nature. One is not evil. One simply exists. One does not seek the dissolution of the world. It's part of the natural order. One does not seek to corrupt, destroy, and dissolve. One is not a symbol of entropy and the wiping out of everything that we recognize as the mortal realms. And the other side is chaos. Chaos is just wrong. Nature is not good or evil. Nature is just nature, and the hags deal with spirits of nature. And that means that some of them, by mortal standards, look tremendously evil, capricious, and terrible. Some of them are mischievous beyond compare, but they are all part of the natural cycle. Whereas chaos is not. It is imposing itself upon the natural cycle and attempting to destroy it. So for your average Ungol wandering through, I don't know, one of the oblasts somewhere. Hi, I'm Mr. Ungol. And there's a bunch of nasty spirits over there. I'll go and speak to the hag who might be able to help me out with this. You speak to the hag. Can we go in there? And the hag says, no, you don't want to go in there because that place is corrupted. That place over there hasn't. So that's where we're going to take you. And it may appear similar to them, which is why they need the hags. Because to them, it's just crazy spirit bullshit. But to the hags, they're like, no, those ones have been corrupted by chaos because a ritual was conducted there 400 years ago that corrupted the local spirits and have turned them wrong. And they're attempting to tear apart reality rather than be a part of it. Where over there, no, they're just normal spirits. They'll just kill you for normal reasons. So that's what you need your hags for, to help protect you from these spirits. Make sure you go through the correct rituals. That's why every single Ungol Stanista, every one of their communities has got a circle of hags, has got, they're not even a circle, has a circle of wise women. On of those wise women, probably 3, 4, 5, or 6 are proper hags. Women who, and they might not like it, they might be sitting there in their 20s or 30s, but they look like they're in their 80s or 90s. Because the magic that they use, the spirits that they deal with, leeches their youth from them. And they are often, particularly by the circle of wise women, seen as figures of pity because they've been granted access to this great thing, but nobody wants it. It's a horrendous burden to bear, because what if you're married and suddenly the sight comes upon you, and then your husband looks at you the next day, or your wife, or whoever it may be, and just goes, "Yeah, well, you're an ugly motherfucker. Get the hell out of here."
Yeah, and
it ruins things.
That's, I think, the core identity of the hags that I've noticed in reading. For anyone that actually wants a really good hag character in a Black Library novel, although like the series itself is super fun, it's more of an interpretation of the full story as opposed to the full story. But there's actually, funny enough, she's not Kislevite, she's in the Empire because she's more of a classic witch. But there's a hag character in the Sigmar trilogy by Graham McNeil who is excellently written. Of that, it is a sacrifice to be a hag, or a good witch. Like, it is not, nobody wants that deal. It sucks. Like, you personally will get nothing out of it other than you are protecting the world and the people around you, and they will hate you for it.
I have a detail. So there's a reason that the hags are all women. And it's easy to say that it's because of men's business and women's business, which is generally how the communities work. But in reality, the ancient widow herself does not deal with men. Just doesn't. So if you want to get access to the spirits and everything else, you need to be, effectively, a hag. You need to be a woman. And she will allow them to deal and treat with her, which means that all the rest of them, all the men who have the chance of magic, are dealing with chaos.
And
because to be a wizard is to deal with chaos.
Yeah, and there's that interesting thread of, you could see that, and this is probably the next thing that would be kind of worth getting into, which is really interesting, of there is clearly a very strong connection between the origin of the hag's power and the origin of the ice witch's power, in that they're women only, at least.
There's a difference.
Yeah, there is a difference, but that's what we should go into next, of what is the difference. There is something in Kislev that called, even though it had, if it's the same source per se, it had the hags, but it then went out of its way to draw in these conquerors to almost punish the people that were defending it in the first place.
Yeah, so there's a wonderful story there that was left open. And I think it speaks to exactly what you're suggesting there. Because are they the same entity or are they not? Because why would the ancient widow that supposedly supports the hags pull in the Gospodars and wipe out their people to a great degree and push them to the edges and leave only really Prague showing any real Ungol identity anymore? Erengrad used to be their old capital. And why? And that's a good question. And I'm not going to answer it because we didn't write an answer. And your answer is as good as mine. What I can say, though, is that the ice witches are in a different place. Now, much like the hags, it is a sisterhood. So we're starting from a very similar position. So you might think, well, it's the same beginning place. But unlike the hags, their magic can be used by men. They just don't let it happen at all. In the slightest. If you can channel magic, if you're picked out as the ice witches make their way through the various communities, and if they find that there is a young woman, they pull that young woman, and they can use magic into the system.
Off to the ice court. Off you go.
Off to the ice court, away you go. If you're a man, you're pretty much going to get killed. They kill you. And the reason they do, there's ways out of it, like, for example, being really noble and getting shipped off to the Empire because, well, your family found out early you're going to be fine.
There's something really interesting I want to discuss in a second about this, but continue.
I'll make the final point in it then, and that's that their men get killed for a reason, because the ice witches have long had a prophecy, let's say, or a tradition or a belief that their magic will be forever tainted by an ice wizard, for want of a better description. The old shamanistic ice witch, perhaps from Dark Omen. Maybe it's his fault. Now, I had a real idea of exactly what was going to occur with that. Indeed, we even wrote the story of it. I'm very amused as I've looked at the beginning of... very amused when I look at the beginning of how Total War starts off with its story, because it was a relatively similar story. But effectively, the Ice Witches believe that there will come a man who will taint the source forever. But you've got to realize that that is from their propaganda-esque perspective. What does even taint mean?
Yeah, well, and there's there's that underlying thread of, is it because the thing that called them told them that, or is it because the IceCon queens were like, we have power, we shouldn't surrender this, or there's a lot that could happen there. And so one thing, this is a tangent, but it's a very interesting tangent, so I want to go off on it, which is that there is a very strong law in the Warhammer world over multiple continents, multiple races, that men wielding magic will bring doom. Where Malekith has outlawed male sorcerers because there's a prophecy that he will be defeated by a male wizard, and he's like, not even going to risk it, get rid of him. Same thing in Kislev, where there's you cannot have a male hag, and the Ice Witches have a prophecy. And the same thing in Bretonia. The Lady of the Lake does not tolerate male wizards. They have to be sent away, or else the Fae Enchantress will come to collect them, and they're never seen again. Unless you read a super awesome short story that reveals what happens to them, and it's super badass, but they don't become wizards. And they also never get to go home.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on there?
Right. So, there's the canonical reason, and I say that with heavy quotation marks, and I mean what the large canon of work that Games Workshop has offered and is accepted says, and it says nothing. So let's be absolutely clear on this. It does not bring this out and separate it and say it's a thing. They do, however, repeat it all over the place. And individual writers have come up with their own reasons and sometimes have made their own little niche corners where they've made little squeaky answers that might perhaps be the case.
Yeah, it is eye-catching, though.
It is.
It is
now,
very eye-catching.
In Kislev, there is a realm-wide belief across all of Kislev that men can't be trusted with magic. That male wizards will always corrupt and fall to chaos every single time. They will always fall. It's not a matter of when, I mean if, it's a matter of when. They are convinced that the male psyche, its aggression, its need for power, its need for control, and whilst that may be a generalization, the fact that that generalization applies to most is too much of a danger for them to accept. It needs someone who is much more careful as a generalization. And in terms of gender politics, that's where they've landed. And that is the case in Kislev, and their male wizards are hunted down and murdered. Right or wrong, that's what occurs to them. Now, is this because that's true? If you're in Kislev, the answer is yes. Is this because that's true over in Nagaroth? The answer is no. They don't believe that male spellcasters can't be trusted. And quite the opposite. They're fine with it. It's just Malekith who's got a problem with that shit. Yes. And possibly his mum because of Malekith. And that pretty much ties that one down. Is that the case in Bretonia? No, the elves are doing something quite different down there. There is different stories in different places. However, there is an undercurrent throughout it all that the human species is the most likely to fall to chaos. And beyond that, that men are much more likely to fall to chaos than women because of the power that they constantly, apparently, crave.
something, Archaon was a man, something.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway, but I just thought that was a very interesting through line there.
I think it's a great one and a good one to call out.
So back to the hags, kind of leaning and I think focusing more on this aspect of sacrifice, because I think it's a really interesting thing to delve into. In that, like you said, something that a lot of people may not realize about the hags that is a tragedy, but also something kind of inspiring and badass about them, is that their power is not their own a lot of the time. It is a relationship. It is a bargaining ship between them and these spirits, where you have to realize that when you're dealing with a hag, this is an entity who, however old she is, the older generally being more powerful, just like with everything in Warhammer, generally speaking, this is someone who has to make these signed in blood contracts with spirits, many of which are horrible, terrifying entities, but she is protecting her communities from said spirits by forming these bargains.
Yeah, and she's almost like the classic example of a priest. Now, I know this may come as somewhat of an unexpected outfield shot. But in most historical societies, religion was not the province of a priest trying to convert you to their beliefs. It was instead somebody who was there to tell you what you can and can't do because of the gods, and to appeal to the gods when things were going wrong, and to try and hopefully abate their wrath. They were there not to convert and make you live a certain way. They were there to try and protect you from the gods, because they were the ones that understood them and were brave enough to actually treat with them. And in some respects, the hags are very similar. They are community leaders in many respects. They have a circle of wise women that the hags are a part of, that stand in, let's say, almost balance with, say, the atamans or the local rulers or the boyars. And they sit on either side, balancing each other out, making the decisions on behalf of their community. Now, they themselves, the ones that actually can treat with the spirits, let's be relatively blunt. Much like all wizards in the Warhammer world, the more you use your magic, the more you become like it. If you're a human. This is the case for almost all magic types in the Warhammer world for humans. And the more you try to treat with the spirits of
you will shed your humanity.
The more you become like the Ancient Widow, and the more the spirits like you. Because the more you become like the Ancient Widow, and the more you become like the Ancient Widow, the more powerful you become. And the more powerful you become, the more spirits there are going to listen to you. But the more spirits are going to listen to you, the more you become like the Ancient Widow, the less you are who you were, and the less you potentially care about the very communities that you were once protecting. Because you yourself become almost like a spirit, particularly when you're ancient. Take, for example, the only example of one of the really old ones we dropped in, as I mentioned before, was the Sea Hag. She's almost a force of nature. They see her as responsible for tsunamis and various other horrors that are inflicted upon Erengrad and the area around. Spirits that rise out of the water, horrible sea entities that do stuff, and they're all at the Hag. The Hag is not someone that anyone can treat with. They send other hags to deal with her.
Because probably like,
she's so beyond them. Because she has taken that step almost too far. She's almost become a spirit herself. And if you want another view of that, it's a little bit like becoming. It's like a little bit like ascending and becoming a demon prince. They're all similar cosmologies reflected in different ways in different communities. But where some of them are part of the natural order of the world, as much as it can be described, others are perverting that natural order and twisting it to try and bring about dissolution of all things.
So, Vekoma, interesting question here of, do you have to be a descendant from these tribes to become a hag? I would think the answer is, do you have to? No, but it's probably starting at a disadvantage if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, the Ancient Widow is an entity that has actual character. So don't think of this as something that is benign. Obviously, it's not. But as something that doesn't have an opinion on things. It's got an actual character, that down to individuals and how they interpret that when they write it up in various books, but it's got one. So that means it's got preferences and things that it does and it doesn't like. Does that mean that it's only going to go for one thing? For example, it will only allow its spirits to treat with Ungol women? Possibly, but I would say probably no. If you were brought up in the communities of the Ungols and you were raised there, it's very likely you could get, for example, a Gospodar child. Or, as is often the case with the Ungols, if you're looking at the Ungols, for all they've got a particular racial background, they've got lots of mixed races between the various tribes that came about. There's lots of very different types of Ungols.
And how Kislev itself has shrank and grown over the years. Like, it used to go way further south into what we now know as the Empire.
Yeah, totally.
Which they've shown in Warhammer the Old World, which I'm very excited for, is that Kislev is actually much further south than we're used to. And
I'm that's good. Where was I? I was going to say something about that. Yeah. So, do I think that it's necessary they come from that ethnicity, that ethnicity in particular? Probably. In that belief system, yes. But do they need to come from, as in those from those communities? Do they need to come from that bloodline? Probably not. Although there is the belief for ice witches that the answer is definitely yes.
Yeah, I would say ice witches are probably a different scenario. Yeah. So George P, this is technically a tangent, but hey, I'll always let y'all throw money at us to change topics.
Throw money. Yeah.
What are our thoughts on the villains of Warhammer? I think they don't really progress their plans, and they seem to be too ambitious for their own sake and get shut down by Games Workshop. Nagash rules. Okay, so I think that's technically two different questions of if you're looking at the modern, like whatever setting you're looking at, the modern timeline, yes, your villains are almost virtually never going to get anything done because Games Workshop, this is a big criticism I have of them. They are often scared of change. They like to create a static setting because a static setting allows them to sell minis more often easily because they don't have to justify, like, if a character dies, well, do you keep printing rules for that character, or do you like still support that character, or do you go, oh, well, he's dead now, so we're not going to do that? And if so, what about the people that have invested into those minis? Like, what's their situation going to be? And it's a lot of work to have a living setting. And for your villains to be able to do things, you have to have a living setting, or in the case of 40K, make your setting so big that nothing matters.
Yeah.
Then the villains can win. And I think in a lot of ways that's why 40K was able to outpace fantasy, of that it could have what felt like a moving storyline, even though it didn't, but it could pretend to, because they could just make up planets whenever they wanted. Warhammer did not have the advantage of it has a defined planet, so it's not as easy to be like, oh, there's an epic conflict happening in the Empire. Well, what happens if Chaos wins? Like,
yeah. I mean, that was actually the problem of their summer campaigns, because Warhammer had several summer campaigns. What they ended up doing was go, summer campaign. Actually, yeah, no, retract. That didn't happen. So, for example, the Storm of Chaos, a very famous one, where the Chaos forces swept down into the Empire to take the Flame of Ulrich. And when it was all finished, they all sat down and went, yeah, that definitely happened. It definitely happened. Actually, no, it didn't. And then they did exactly the same again with the Nemesis Crown campaign. That actually took place way in the future.
Shadows over Albion, Nemesis Crown,
yeah, right.
Chaos.
Well, the Shadows over Albion sort of almost managed to hang about for a bit and then get kicked out.
It hung around for a full edition.
Yeah, it did. It was all right for a while, but Nemesis Crown, I mean, that actually legitimately moved this setting forward by almost 2 decades. Karl Franz was old by this point. He's an old emperor sitting on the throne. It's not set in the same setting that we all know as the end times. It's set after it. It's like 10 years after it.
Yeah, it's kind of written almost post Storm of Chaos, because it's like Grimgor's back, and like it's very fun read.
It's some pretty crazy stuff. And then they completely retconned that again, dialed the time all the way back again, and then moved it up towards that same date, the sort of 25, 22 area, and then went, yeah, TikTok, boom, boom, the world's end, 25, 25, gone.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, I love Warhammer villains, but that's why I prefer to deal with before like 2512. Because everything pretty much after like 2512, 2515 generally kind of grinds to a halt and not a lot happens because of that. But that's why I love everything before it, because the villains, because it's part of the timeline, and like we see things happening and you get to see villains at their best. In fact, if you take a look at Total War, you can actually see the problem made manifest, and you can see what Total War has done to resolve the problem. The problem with the ongoing villains rise and fall, and good guys rise and fall, is that you love some of those characters, so you want to use them, both on the good and the bad guy side. So what have they done? Total War just said, yep, they're in the game. But didn't they come from a few hundred years ago? Yep, they're in the game. Away they go. Man, at some point I will have to do a stream on it maybe, but like I literally have like almost a crazy man Peppa Sivlia board explaining how every single character exists simultaneously. Does it work? Yes. Are there some stretches? You bet your ass there are some stretches, but
that's because those characters are cool. We want to play with them. And that's the problem that Games Workshop faced. They had themselves a bunch of characters that they wanted to use because they were so popular, but to advance them forwards and to put them into jeopardy was to potentially kill that gold mine. So they're not going to do that. So what did they do instead? Arguably something far worse. They just kept on putting more and more powers on top of them, more and more abilities on top of them to justify them somehow surviving.
And it gets stale.
And it got stale. All their characters became superheroes, ridiculous superheroes, to the point that you look at them going, what?
Okay, I'll say I resent this comment. The whole point of Thankful is that he fails into success, so how dare you? He's fine. Thankful's awesome.
Yep, agreed, 100%.
If Thanquil is successfully doing what he set out to do, then you're writing him wrong. All right. So anyway, getting back to hags here. This is a perfect comment to get back to hags. How do hags relate to shamans and hedge wizards? Because they seem very different, which they are in a lot of ways.
They are. They're completely different. The easiest way to resolve this is they are completely different traditions of magic. So you're as well saying, how do hags work with I don't know, sorcerers from the other side of the world, or more appropriately, how do ice witches work with bright wizards? Because they are both basically doing the same thing, but they are completely different traditions of magic on two different sides of a very different political divide.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, like Andy said earlier, the hags do not use the winds of magic in a traditional sense, which is exceedingly unique. Like, it's difficult to express how unique that is in the Warhammer world, because using magic is almost universal, with the exception of the dwarves who can't. So they had to figure out another way. Whereas the hags theoretically could, but found
100% could. The hags could use dark magic. They could use magic in general, but they just do not. All of their magical capability, if you want to drop it down to the actual thing of it, their witch sight, their ability to channel, their ability to sense what's going on, is all channeled towards spirits and manipulating them. For example, in the rules, they didn't use skills like channeling. They used skills like leadership, command. They told the spirits what to do.
Yeah. Luring Lion, thank you. First of all, not sure if Andy is aware of this, so spoiler alert, but in Total War's defense, the built-in narrative of Warhammer 3 actually advances with Katerin being victorious. Yes. So, okay. So, once again, very big difference between Games Workshop and Creative Assembly, because Creative Assembly is actually telling a story where, like, they are actively pushing things forward. And also, Creative Assembly works much better under the idea of, like, they're comfortable with people dying. And, you know, what's funny is that if you go back in time, there was a time when Games Workshop was comfortable with it too, which is when I thought they were at their best. Like, you could play with Grom the Paunch and Gorbad Ironclaw and Azhag the Slaughter. A lot of the Greenskin characters died, but you could still play with them, and it was fun. And they would literally have a note in the special character section saying, if you play with this character, just assume it's happening in the past or weird time shit happened. Don't worry about it. Just have fun. And
yeah, absolutely. The books, as they were presented, the army lists, were not books about the present. They were books about that entire faction.
Yeah, or Gothor the Beast Lord, another great example.
Yeah, totally.
Marius Fleetdorf.
Yeah, if you were playing orcs and goblins, you would get the heroes from across time for the orcs and goblins, because they were the standout characters, where later army lists turned into what is the army in 2520, and that's it. And any of the older characters got pushed aside to be replaced by newer ones. In the original Empire army list, for example, it had Magnus the Pious as a character. That's obviously 200 years in the past.
That is not a coincidence. Yeah. I would say that is not a coincidence at all in the writing there. So, getting back to kind of the hags and the relationship behind them, because I just see a lot of really good questions coming up from the chat. So this is something we've kind of touched on a little bit of while the hags are a defensive force for Kislev, they are also very scary. They're very unsettling. They're very gross, as Andy has said. And humans don't like those kinds of things. They don't like scary things. And part of those bargains they make with the spirits, if you have a spirit that prowls the forest, like a type of Leshen or something, and the exchange is it allows the people to live in the forest and thrive in exchange for like a certain amount of blood or a life every 20 years or something. The hag fulfills those debts, but the people may not understand the point of those debts. And all they see is the payment they're giving without realizing the crisis they're averting. So to them, it's, oh, the hag's evil. Look what she's doing to us.
Yeah, you've also got to, I would add that it gets even stronger, but the Ungol community in particular are pretty much almost universally in support. They argue with because you've got to remember that the wise women are parts of their community. They're not a separate part. They don't lie on the outside. It's not like, say, the hedge folk who are on the periphery. These are people who live with them. Now, their hut might be on the edge because, let's be honest, it's the wise women, and no one really wants to treat with them too much because they're scary. But nevertheless, they're part of the community. But for the Gospodars, they are a challenge to their authority. They are fucking scary. And really, what is the difference between a demon and a spirit anyway? Seriously.
Yeah, well,
perspective, completely different cup of tea.
Yeah, it's that whole thing of like there are Menhir stones or waystones in the Empire that are actively there to protect the world. That is their only purpose. And you'll have some Sigmarite come in and go, "Oh, that's the old faith. Knock it down. Screw this thing. Get rid of it."
Yeah,
it's because they don't understand it and they're scared of what they don't understand.
Sigmarites would be all over those hags as witches and burn them, every single last one of them, because they're cheating with demons.
Witch hunter,
yes,
yeah.
That is not good. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. You ever want to have really fun role play stuff, like the interaction between the old faiths or old magics and witch hunters is a classic. So
burn the witch. I mean, burn the ugly witch. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. That's one of the reasons why burning the ugly witch had to be subverted as a trope. When I was writing up that section, they had to be the good guys.
This is the goofiest comment I think I have read in a hot minute of it's Be'lakor all along.
It's Be'lakor all along.
So some other things that I think some comments that I've seen come up that are interesting to talk about. So one of the things that's really present in the Warhammer world is the sense that the earth has power, that a lot of magic or something that is akin to magic flows through the continents, flows underneath the earth, and it is often seen, with the exception of when magic was at its absolute zenith, it is often kind of showcased as like the most powerful force present in the world, with the geomantic web kind of being a very strong expression of that. And Kislev almost seems to feed into this idea where there's a lot going on beneath. Be'lakor is a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Like, yes, he is scary, but he is legit. Like, him and Thanquol are surprisingly... Thanquol, I think, is a little more on the nose about it, but if you think Be'lakor is not that, you're totally wrong.
Although, if you've watched my most recent stream, possibly has made his first appearance.
In
terms of the state. It was Be'lakor all along.
Yeah, like, I just want to, okay, just for anyone watching that's not familiar with Be'lakor's shenanigans, I just have to give one example that is my favorite because it's so stupid that it's funny. One of the first times Be'lakor got free from his imprisonment was that he went to the city of Mordheim after it got impacted by the meteor. He might have, who knows, he might have been involved with the meteor, but he possesses a chaos champion in the city and has this whole big scheme about, I finally possessed a mortal body, I win. And then he tries to walk out of the city, and because Be'lakor is so strong, his body just starts melting, and he's like, shit, I can't leave. And he's just stuck. Like, he trades one prison for another because he's a goof. And he ends up having to just sit in Mordheim and be the Shadow Lord and trying to eat enough warpstone that he can make himself strong enough to leave. And then he dies because he's an idiot.
It was Be'lakor all along.
Yeah. He's the best. I love Be'lakor.
So to pull back onto
yes, Hags
was saying there. So we're looking at the geomantic web, because I've got something to say about that, but I'll let you finish off your point. So you can,
so power beneath Kislev. Kislev is very unique in this compared to a lot of lands. Though I am really starting to like the ideas that Nippon is actually probably a very similar concept, but with Kislev, it has all this power underneath it. Like, of all the lands, it's almost Athel level. Athel Lauren levels of, like, there is a sentience there. It seems to almost gather spirits to it that are active far more than anywhere else in the world. And would love to hear you expand upon those concepts of, like, I wouldn't go so far as to call Kislev like a geomancy active zone, but there's something going on there.
Right. So yes is the answer to that. There's no doubt about that. I've got a bit of feedback coming back on my side. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I don't hear anything weird.
Okay, cool. It's just on my side then. Clearly nonsense. I'll ignore it.
It's Be'lakor. It was Be'lakor.
It was Be'lakor all along.
It's like all talking shit.
Right. So, let's make a couple of things absolutely certain, crystal clear. I am getting some feedback in here in my ears, so clearly something's coming from somewhere. I'll go trace it down when I stop talking. So it's right. I'm now going to be able to talk. I'm not going to hear you now. That's really distracting. So ice magic is real. There is no doubting that ice magic is real. And ice magic is only really in Kislev. Now, you can go beyond Kislev as an ice witch and you can still use it and you can do things. It's less powerful. But ice magic itself is sourced there and it comes from the land. There are ice flows that make their way over, like the winds of magic, through the Great Oblast. The Oblast is frozen permanently for a reason. It's at the same level as many parts of the Empire. In fact, it's much lower than most parts of Nordland and Ostland. And yet, it's frozen across its entire length, almost entirely. Now, obviously, there's bits where it's melted and it's in constant permafrost, but it is underneath the ground, always frozen. And that has to come from somewhere. It is mentioned that there are ice flows crisscrossing the land. It is mentioned that it is almost like it's a miniature geomantic web. There are two ways you can interpret it, and there are all the extra ways on top of that you can make up. The two obvious ways you can interpret it is that it is somehow, I'm still hearing whispers coming back in this. It's really annoying. That it is somehow tapping into something older, and it has been plugged by whatever the Ancient Widow is. Whatever, say, Mother Kislev is, depending on which name you want to use and which creature you want to say it is. And it has frozen this power in place and has granted this power to its protectors or to its, you could almost say its avatars that sit above the Ice Witches. That would be one way of viewing it, that there's this plug that's managing to pull stuff out. But if that were the case, and if it were directly tied to, say, the geomantic web, there would be Lizard Man bullshit all over this. There just would be. They would be seeing that their master plan, the great plan, had been disrupted, and they would go, well, this bullshit has to stop somehow. And this has been going on here in Kislev now for at least 1,000 years, probably longer. So probably 2,000 at least. And if that's the case, that's 2,000 years for the lizard men to say, oi, Ancient Widow, fuck off.
Yeah.
Which means that it's almost certainly not that, because we don't have long-standing tales of lizard men attacking Kislev for one reason or another, or even infiltrating it, or even discussing it, or being bothered by that weird place on the other side of the world. So to say that it's tapped into the Diamantic Web as option number one seems weak, but it doesn't mean it's not true. The second most likely one is that there's some sort of blockage to the Great Vortex's winds of magic. So the Great Vortex that gathers all the winds of magic at Ulthuan has a network of menhirs across the world, the Waystones, and they channel magic in that direction. And perhaps doing almost exactly the same thing, but at a different level, let's say geomantic level below, and then elf network above. The elf network above is disrupted. And somehow the spirit that sits in there is channeling all that shit into there. Now, could that be the case? Is it some sort of filter for the winds that turns it into ice and somehow cleanses it, meaning that they don't suffer from the same curses that all the rest of the wizards across the world suffer from? Instead, they just get frozen, which is not great. As they channel the ice wind, for want of a better description, if they do that badly, the wind itself will freeze them in place and chill their hearts until they are passionless, horrendous, empty monsters. So that's a slightly different downside to what the rest of the wizards are dealing with out in the general world, but it's still a downside. So,
at least you don't explode, I guess.
Yeah, you don't explode. Woo! Instead, you freeze. Woo! And there's in the Kislev book, for example, there's a noted almost fever where you can lose yourself to the ice, where you lose yourself completely, your compassion. You become a psychopath to the nth degree. And one of the rumors in that book is that the Ice Queen's cousin has gone that direction and she's protecting her. And she's just going around murdering folk with her ice magic. So clearly the spirit that is doing this, if it's a spirit, is potentially nasty. So we've got this potential demon stroke, Mother Kislev stroke, possibly good guy, whatever you wish to call it, sitting underneath there, channeling all those winds and turning them into something else. That's a separate option. Or option number 3, it's benevolent. It's great. It's just the spirit that lies down there that's created its own network, that's somehow built its own stones that are, because it is worked through ancient stones, just like all the rest of them. So it does really look like high elf work when you look at the actual cosmology of how these things are put together. Not cosmology, the timeline of how these things are put together. But, have made their own network of stones, and perhaps they're related to another ancient species. And there's a couple of mentions to centaurs, for example, that used to live there that were not centaurs. They get given different names at different points in Kislev. Sadly, as I recall, Dan Abnett called them the Scythians, which is far too much of a real world reference to really be the best option. But then, hey, we've got Prague.
I do love Warhammer Prague.
Me too. I do as well. But then you go, oh, wait a minute, is that just Prague?
Yeah. Yeah. So some interesting things there. A lot. And so, okay, we have a lot of people who are there's a ton of people being like, wait, so are ice witches like chaos dwarves in that they literally turn to ice statues? It's more of a spiritual curse, not a physical curse.
Oh no, it's a physical one as well. But they don't wander around covered in ice. It's just they might freeze up and that's it, and they're gone. Don't think of it like that, because that is when things are going wrong. That's when it's gone off. With the Chaos Dwarves, it's an inevitability because their system is so antithetical to the magic that it basically turns into stone. That's one way of putting it. With ice witches, it's when things have gone wrong. They've channeled too much of it, perhaps, and it freezes them in place. They go too far, or they've just messed up. It's a little bit similar to mishaps on the Warhammer table. A little bit similar to Tzeentch's Curse in 2nd edition, or similar to a miscast in the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So,
Andy, you probably know this.
Yes. So Hag Magic doesn't have a true name because it's not actually doing any magic.
Not a wind.
They're not channeling a wind. They're not doing anything. Ice magic behind the scenes did have a name. It was Kishel, and I have that written down somewhere. It's spelled with a Q. But yeah, Kishel. So purposely named quite close to Akshay as well, because the idea was behind that possibly it was actually a wind of magic that had somehow been subverted or moved.
Yes. So some interesting things. If a man in Kislev, Maharaja of End, yes, that is what is essentially is implied.
No. A man in Kislev shows magic ability. He's not sent to Altdorf. He's killed.
Yes. Sorry. If you notice your child might, if you live in Kislev and you realize your child might have magical ability, that is your only option, probably, to save them.
Yeah, but most people in Kislev don't know that. Remember, the world is a really big place, and our overview knowledge of the colleges of magic just doesn't exist in Kislev. They don't know about it. They just know that, there's strange foreign wizards in foreign lands. That your average Kislevite sitting in Kislev would be like, fuck, my son is awful. Their only choice is to do what they do in the Empire. Throw them out into the Oblast and hope. And they do the same in the Empire when they get Mutant Kid.
So really, if you're a guy in Kislev, don't.
But it's also worth saying that magic generally doesn't come until you hit your teenage years anyway. It's very rare that it comes when you're very young. It does sometimes come when you're very young. There's many stories of kids who've unleashed magical awfulness, X-Men style, around them. But normally it comes in your later years, and the colleges of magic very rarely take anyone over the age of 25. So it can come that late as 22, 23. So it's not so much, my kid. It's generally much more of a me. Oh, shit. Wait, what? I'm a fucking run. And the story is them being on the run, not their parents who are looking at their 24-year-old kid who's got 2 kids of their own. Slightly different world.
Yep. I imagine that could be fun to explore, but I imagine that's never been touched on.
We're going to have to write our own freaking army list for this.
Don't tempt me. So wheeling my way back around to the hags for a bit. Something that has kind of come up a lot, especially recently with Mother Ostenkia, is that Mother Ostenkia is an original character. She's new to the setting because, as some people might, pretty much I think anybody, especially if you're younger like I was, reading through the Realms of the Ice Queen, you're looking for that Baba Yaga character. You're looking for the big hag. There is no big hag. Andy, why is that?
Purposely avoided it, actually, for a variety of reasons. Right, the real reason, if I was to plug one down, was because the studio generally didn't take on board anything that was written for the roleplay games until they did. And when they did, they like to make their own characters. They like to have their own ones. So, for example, on the Ice Queen side, it was super easy. We had their character, the Ice Queen, and we could use that directly. To do the same on the other side and to create a character that would be ultimately their character would mean that it would be overwritten because they would create their own one, because they always did. So the idea was to try and make sure that we were in a position of inspiring the studio rather than being in a position where the studio came along and just overwrote everything we did. So when I was working on it, I had that in the back of my mind, and I was like, do I want to create a Baba Yaga-esque figure? And my first instinct was immediately, well, no, because I don't want to take rip someone else's culture apart and turn it into just a fantasy creature. I don't want to do that to begin with. So if I was doing it, I'd create my own one. That was my first thought. And then I thought, right, I'm going to be putting, as I recall, I put 3 sample characters for hags in there. One of them was the sea hag, for example. Another one is a hag that's running effectively a chaos camp. So a bunch of mutants that from mutant Ungals, and they are just sent to chaos to die. So rather than kill their mutants, they actually take them, train them, and send them north. And the witches were responsible for that, the hags in particular. But I decided that for all I could, it would be better not to. So if Games Workshop did decide to run with it, they could add their own character to it rather than go, you know what, this is a great idea. I'm now going to overwrite the whole thing. So that's largely what's happened here.
Yeah. Okay. So in light of that, when looking at Mother Ostankia, who we have noted is not as by Total War character design standards, she is a hideous, nightmarish old woman. It's just that Total War standards are a little silly. How do you feel about Mother Ostankia based on what we know about her so far, which granted is not a lot. She isn't being featured for another 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, totally. So we're going to learn more. And that's part of the fun of these things, is to see how other people run with the things that, for me at least, the things that I created in the past. What do I think? I think she's great. I think that they've taken the idea that exists and they've largely run with it. They've not come along and gone, yeah, that was a great idea. I'm going to completely change it, make it into something new. It's largely what it was. There's still a bunch of hags, because it's not just her. There's also hag mothers, apparently, an extra cartridge you can bring in. They're using the Winds of Magic per se. But you could argue behind the scenes that they're actually using not that, and it's just how their magic represents. That's what I'll think in my head. It'll be my own little personal headcanon. But she herself is coming in with a whole bunch of spirits, doing spirity stuff, being an ugly old hag woman who is closely associated with the Ungals. Is she anywhere near ugly enough from what I would expect? No, it's not just she's not ugly enough, she's not old enough.
Have you seen the way they interpreted ugly? Yes.
I haven't actually seen Hellebrand,
like,
and I don't.
You have to understand what we're working with when it comes to old ladies. Like,
look. Did you ever see
just flat out sexy with wrinkles? Like,
oh, she is not, is she?
Yeah, like
I'm going to actually look her up. Hellebrand.
It's a limitation of the medium. I'm sure if they were like bringing in artists to draw Mother Ostankia, she'd probably be way nastier looking.
Holy shit balls. Okay, yeah. Oh well, I'm gonna holy shirt balls. It's holy forking shirt balls. Yeah, that's not my Hellebrand.
Yeah, so like let's understand that it's a limitation of the engine.
That being the case, he's great. Yeah, I also really liked. Yeah, totally. I also really like the addition saying that she was using, that they had to collect ingredients together to get off the special hag ritual malarkeys that she was doing. Because inside the core rules for the hag inside that I created, they literally couldn't cast their spells without the ingredients, because the ingredients were what enticed the spirits to them. They used the ingredients to bring the spirits to them, which the spirits would then be commanded and manipulated with their magic. Not the winds of magic, it was literally them manipulating the spirits. And they wouldn't come without certain pacts being in place or whatever. So that's all in place. So pretty much everything that I originally created is there. It's just not quite the way I did it, but whatever. It's a different game. If you take a look at Warhammer and compare it to Total War, nothing is quite the way that it was originally presented, because they've gone their own way. And that's one of the reasons the game has managed to succeeds so well, it's because it's managed to take all the shit we love and squeeze it in somehow. Even if it doesn't really fit into a gigantic world-spanning war game, they've still squeezed it in. And me personally, I adore that because they've done a lot of hard work to make it all come to place.
Yeah, so there are some criticisms that I think are worth addressing at this point relating to the game, kind of the natural segue into talking about the game for a bit. So a lot of people, and this is something that I can go ahead and say that I'm working on a video on because I'm going to be pushing for it, but that's due more to the price discussion than anything else. There's no lore of hags, Andy. Where's the lore of hags? And the answer to that is kind of complicated in that, like, I think at this point there needs to be one, but from like, if you step back a level, the lore of hags really is not a regular, like, it's a weird thing.
Because super easy to translate, though. Here come the spirit.
Yes. I agree, but like, I could see why initially they might not have looked at it as, oh, that's something we should do, because it's kind of almost more of a, it tends to not, it doesn't come off as a battle lore a lot of the time. It tends to come off more like subtle little curses and little things that are more, from a roleplay perspective, are significant, but on a battlefield are significantly more subtle.
I'm going to address that directly because I think it's a flaw of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition rather than a flaw of the potential for a lore for hags. And by that I mean the 2nd edition of the rules was very much pitched at low tier play. They quite clearly stated that things like battle wizards that you'd find in the battlefield, Grail Knights, and the top tier shit literally couldn't be represented by the rules. They couldn't even figure out how to get Grail damsels in because they were too powerful. So the top level hag witches, the lore of hags, so to speak, isn't covered by what's inside the book. The stuff that's inside the book is the same as the crappy little spells that you get for all of the lores of magic inside the core book. And they might sound like they're doing a bit. Here's a fireball running over a bit in comparison to the bullshit that you can pull when you're playing a game of Warhammer. As you pull fire down from the sky that kills 150 folks. You don't be doing that too well with the roleplay game in the 2nd edition. The 4th edition, to a degree, started to tackle that, but has not yet nailed it, I think.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask is, if you could choose between like a lore of hags that would be implemented on a character, so not as a faction mechanic, but like an individual character mechanic, do you think it'd be more appropriate for it to be more like a selection of abilities that are unleashed and have like little cooldowns and stuff? Or do you think it'd be more appropriate for it to be a lore of magic where you are using from your Winds of Magic pool to unleash spells? Now, I don't think either of those are necessarily ideal.
Yeah, I would create a new mechanic, I think. I wouldn't be happy using the lore of the Winds of Magic rule, but I would be happy using a rule that's almost identical to it that says the strength of the local spirits. So what you could do, for example, is your hag character would be far stronger beside the trees, far stronger beside the rivers, far stronger beside, areas that are marked to be high spiritual activity. As you move across an empty area, their winds naturally drop down, for want of a better description. You could easily build it so that the hag has got their own mechanic, but I haven't played the game enough to be able to say this is how to do it. I'm making shit up off
that actually immediately jumps some interesting ideas into my head of like the game does have some ways to tell when you are standing in terrain. Granted, it's pretty basic because it's like whether you're in a forest or a water feature, but that's still something to work with.
It's still a start, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that would be a super fun mechanic because it would immediately change the nature of how those armies start to move around in the battlefield, because the hags themselves would want to skirt certain types of scenery, which might not be strategically to their benefit in terms of where the battlefield it lays out. The hags themselves would have very little power inside cities or sieges, which is, I think, quite fun, but they'd have to pull the spirits out from the trees and then have the spirits go and do all the work.
Yeah, I have some ideas. I have some ideas for how that could work. Now, granted, it'd have to come with the concession that the Lord of Hags would kind of have to be kind of a regular wind of magic, or it would have to be treated like a wind, but there are things you could do with it.
Yeah, I think that's how to deal with it. That's how Second Edition did it.
Yeah, Silence of Virtue. Kislev feels kind of weak to me theme-wise, since all of their armies seem like they're composed of Gospodars, kind of torn on making the beast elemental. Okay, this is an interesting thing to touch on from a game perspective. First of all, thank you for the super chat and all that. So, first of all, I think a very common misconception is that the Kislevite armies are Gospodar. They're not technically. The game does not call out your Ungol units, but you do have Ungol units. They're just not very well
represented.
Yeah, they did not go out of their way to make them notably different, which they should have. But technically, like your Kossovite dervishes, your Kislev horse archers, and your unarmored Kossars, those are your Ungals.
That's your Ungals.
They are literally your
Do
Ungals.
they look like Ungals? No. But
no.
They are.
Like if they should be more distinct, but that's who they are.
If you want to see someone bitch about this at length, wait till I start playing this game online, and you're going to hear me bitch and
Andy,
bitch and bitch.
I want to reveal a secret to you that I've not told you yet, and I don't think you know about it.
I don't.
So, Prince Yuri, which chat no spoilers.
I'm aware of this character because I started the game. That's
yes, chat no spoilers. Don't tell him about
anything. I'm not looking at the chat just in case.
Do not tell him what happens to Yuri because we want him to. We want to see his reaction live. Which, hey, make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel and his Twitch channel so that you'll see when he goes live, so that you can watch that. Yeah, man. So, Prince Yuri may have actually been a character you wrote, and you might not realize it. So, Prince Yuri, in reality, is Yuri taken from the Ultimate Career Compendium based on the Kislevite careers. He is an adventure hook character.
Oh, fuck.
He is a Kislevite horse riding career. There's an adventure hook about that's exactly like I don't know if you remember how that story goes, but it is the same guy.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Isn't it funny how
you wrote that character?
It's a weirdo world, eh?
Yeah, I cannot wait for you to get to how his story ends.
Looking forward to it.
So anyway, fun. There's fun. There's your little Total War lore nugget for the moment. So the other thing that's really interesting. So there's been a lot of criticism, and it's a criticism I understand, but I also want to address and then also get Andy's opinion on about that. Oh, why we're getting the Ungal Hags, and yet the units that are coming with it are a little weird. Where it's like, okay, it's the Akshina, but the Akshina have been very heavily changed. In that originally they were called Chekis, being kind of like the secret police. Not a great name, in my opinion. I think Akshina is infinitely better.
Me too. I much prefer it.
And they have been further changed from being, they are no longer seemingly the secret police within the cities of the Gospodars, but they are now almost more like rangers or agents of the Hags that are watching over the rural aspects of Kislev, which is a pretty significant alteration, but I don't hate it.
No, neither do I. I think it fits in perfectly. As long as the Gospodars have got some form of equivalent, and it doesn't need to be in a war game. It just needs to be some equivalent of the but some equivalent of the fact that they are controlling. The Gospodars are far more controlling people.
Yeah, which I believe we have one. There was a Regiment of Renown added a few patches ago that is a Regiment of Renown of armored Kossars, and I think they're called the the night something.
The night man. Oh, I'm getting always sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, I don't want to say the Night Watch because that's obviously
even worse. The movie, yeah. Totally.
But in their lore blurb, it's revealed that they are the secret police of the Tsarina.
Interesting.
And that they are. Is it the Watchmen in the Night? That might be what it is. Which is like a way of saying. But anyway, they are the secret police of Katerin, and the way that they are very distinct is that not only are they like super scary looking, but they have enchanted blades because they have wield ice blades.
Of course,
ice magic. Because but it's like, but I actually really like that they're very unique looking because they're that heavily armored, very brooding, scary. They're gonna smash down your door and like come kick the shit out of you. But yeah, the ROR armored Kossar is the secret police unit. It's a Regiment of Renown instead of being a regular unit, which to me makes sense because there wouldn't really be that many of them.
I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, the Watchmen in the Night. That's their unit titles, the Watchmen in the Night. Mm-hmm. And that has allowed the Akshina to evolve into something different, which I actually do like quite a bit.
I think it's fine. I think it works very well from the idea as well that the Ungals are as a people far more involved with all of this. Yes, I'm definitely getting an echo. I can hear my own voice coming back every once in a while.
You must have do you have a tab or something open somewhere?
I don't.
That's just very subtle. Because
I'll go round
I
them.
can tell you, I don't hear it on my end, and the chat doesn't hear it.
Okay, that's all that matters then, as long as no one else hears it.
Yeah. So then there's the other two units, which open up kind of an interesting can of worms. So we have the things in the wood, which were I think a pretty big surprise to pretty much anyone, because it's a Mordheim unit,
Totally.
or entity. In that when I initially saw them, I thought they were referencing the things from the Deadwood, which is similar but not the same. The things of the Deadwood being a humanoid unit from a very specific forest in the or not quite the Empire, but it's like that near Empire Kislev ballpark. The Deadwood is a nasty place. But it is. Wait, y'all can hear it, or
I'm not hearing anything now to make things even more annoying.
Yeah, I know. I don't believe you, Anthony. Thanks for coming by. I don't believe you.
Anthony, who are you? Hey!
But the things of the wood are a very interesting unit in that of all the things they could have landed on, kind of a bizarre choice. I do love their design. They're absolutely amazing looking.
I haven't looked at them yet. I'm gonna have a quick check.
Here, I will pull up a picture for you. But what's interesting about them, no, not real world things in the wood. Thank you, Appalachia. Freaking Appalachian Mountains. It's weird living in America and forgetting that the Appalachian Mountains are an actual thing, and not just a mythical like it's a real place where weird shit apparently happens.
All I'm getting is wood elf shit. Now, this is useless.
Yeah, hold on. I will pull up.
That'd be awesome.
Yes, I got it. But what are your thoughts on them? Because like it seems like they're kind of meant to represent these nightmarish spirits of the forest taking on like a war aspect. But
I think that's fine. I in general, without the specifics, I've not seen them, and I really should have a quick check. There you go. Static rose up for minutes after I removed my earbuds. Oh, good to know. So there's clearly something going somewhere. Yeah, I'm definitely hearing a slight echo on my side. So maybe there's something going on with my setup here, and only I'm hearing it. Anyway, that all aside, I think that having some representation of the spirits is great, and they've chosen this, and that's fine. They have a very limited budget, I presume, to create lots of funky little models. I would have been just as happy with a whole bunch of tiny little wood elf spirit style things popping up as well. That'd have been fine. As I said very near the beginning of the stream, the hags had in their rules that they could have dryads as spirit familiars, that they could have naiads spirit familiars kicking around all over the place. I'm just going to pull up the
so I sent you like those creatures pulling Mother Ostankia's chariot. I believe those are the things in the wood.
Oh, that's the things in the wood. Ah, okay.
So they're kind of like dog creatures with no flesh on their heads.
But do they have like skull heads? Somewhat similar to
interesting. So there's a reverb
to the Gur sort of looking type thing.
Yeah, they when I initially saw them in the trailer, I almost thought they were lesser elementals of Gur.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah, you actually pretty much what I was thinking, because if you take a look at the big elemental that you see afterwards, it's got a very similar style. It's just obviously right up with his horns. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I mean, it's got a nice look. It's sort of spirity, much like you'd expect. All the mischievous angles of spirits disappear when you add the word WAR, and it's all about the Rah! And that's very much a Rah! I'm cool with that. That's great.
And then the last thing is the incarnate elemental of beasts, which was
that's the one I'm just looking at.
It's a weird pick for them, considering the hags traditionally aren't wizards, not in like the classic sense. And Kislev doesn't. Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of the thing, is that it looked like appearance wise, it looks like a terrifying giant Wendigo monster. Like if you think nightmarish creature, spirit of the woods. And I think that's kind of all it boils down to, is that aesthetically it fits. I will say that I'm hoping the reason they picked the incarnate elemental of beast instead of going with a more Kislev specific creature is because it's going to be shared with more races. In that, like, I will be pretty disappointed if, like, I feel every single beast whiz caster in the game, if you get them to a high enough level, like level 40 or level 50, should be able to get a summon of the Incarnate Elemental Beast where they just summon on the battlefield for like 30 seconds or whatever.
That. Pretty much that. That's what I assume is behind the thinking there, because if you're going to create a model and it's going to be for, well, effectively like maybe a character and that's it, you're going to want to be able to reuse that model again to ensure that the assets aren't a big sink of cost that don't go very far. So yes, that and makes sense to me. That's why I have no real problems with it. You have to work within the limitations of the game.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go with. I would have loved a very unique Kislevite spirit monster. I would have loved a Leshen or a Frost Fiend. A Frost Fiend would have been fucking awesome. You know, giant ice bat monster. You know, give me like give me an ice bat the size of a Terrorgeist. Give me that. But there's even stuff in the realms of the Ice Queen book. I don't remember their names off the top of my head because they're not English, so to speak. But there are a couple of creatures talked about who are terrifyingly powerful spirits that are like, they are war monsters. Like you would take an army to go try to fight them and you would lose probably because they're that level of scary. Yeah. But you can't double dip with that. And I think that's kind of what it boils down to, is that you cannot double dip. You can double dip with the Incarnate Elemental Beast, and I think that's the decision why they made the decision they did. Riznia. Okay, I think this is the one I'm thinking about, but I don't want to butcher that.
Let's just not try.
Yeah, but I believe that is correct. Co-Artificer. I believe that one is mentioned specifically being quite scary.
I'm going to take this out from a different perspective, and that's the perspective of, if I was hired to do this, what would I do? Because ultimately, that's always a good place to start thinking on it, because then you're suddenly confined by the same restrictions that the company that has hired you have to work within. And if they say, look, we want to add this in, and you're like, yes, I want to add this in, it's awesome, and they say you can't add it in with any new models, any new thing, any of these things, and you're like, oh, but maybe we could do something and then loop it into another one, and then they go, wait a minute, we can reuse the assets, double dip it that way, that makes sense, and then we can tie it into another one, and then we can show how we can use it. Oh yeah, that'll work. You can see the negotiation that takes place, because there's only so much money and there's only so much time.
Yeah, which those listening, I just want to point this out because it might not be obvious to people that literally every single monster in the DLC is going to double dip. Like the Incarnate Elemental Beast should be available to any faction with a Beast Wizard as a summon, but Kislev is maybe the only ones that get it as like a permanent creature. That way they get a little bit of a unique thing. But like the Mutalith Vortex Beast, that's going to be in the Warriors of Chaos, and it's going to be in Tzeentch. The Cockatrice, that's going to be in the Beastmen, and it's going to be in Tzeentch. Like those creatures are there, and Cathay double dips on its own monster. They used a singular lion design to create a Jade Lion and a Jet Lion.
Yeah.
So every single monster in the DLC is doing double duty.
Yeah. Totally.
Which that's
I'd like to quickly bring up a comment because I want to tackle it directly. How much Games Workshop they drag their feet at it. I'd like to say that I've worked with Games Workshop a lot, and that's generally not what they're like. They are as excited as we are about all the cool shit that we can bring to the table. They are as much fans about this stuff as you are, as I am. And when somebody comes to them and says, here's the cool new thing that we'd like to add, their first thought is very rarely, yeah, no. Their first thought is, yeah, does this work? And never does someone in our position try to present them something that isn't already, to its very core, Games Workshop-y. So you tend to find that it's much more collaboration as the Games Workshop side and the license side work upon building something super awesome. It's very rarely them dragging their feet or saying no. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, as much as I like to dunk on Games Workshop as much as anybody because they do make a lot of stupid decisions. But like when it comes to this thing, it is the person that has to pay for it that is making the shot, who's calling the shots.
Yeah,
that's who calls them. It's the guy who has to sit there and goes, okay, you want me to spend how much money to pay how many people's hours, and it's going to take them how long to make this thing? No, that's not realistic. We have to do this other thing.
Obviously, just to bounce back on what I say, Games Workshop clearly have last call in this. This is their property, obviously. Yes. But I just like to make it clear that Games Workshop are not dicks. They love this shit as much as we do.
Yeah. I have zero doubt that if Creative Assembly went to them and was like, we want to do these unique spirit creatures for Kislev that they would not have been like, oh yeah, awesome, great, do it. Especially because they're like working on a Kislevite model range. Anything they could do to make Kislev feel more unique, they are probably just like, oh good, we could potentially use that in the future. That sounds great. But yeah, why do they charge us so much for reused assets? That's a great question. Unfortunately, neither of us work at Creative Assembly, and we can't answer that for you. That's why I'm going to be doing a video on that, either coming out tomorrow or the next day, that we're going to be having a discussion about how to justify, how CA could maybe add a couple things to justify that price, because that is, of course, a very big thing in the community right now. But I do want to get back on topic with Hags. So how far?
Let's meander away from topic. Yeah. Never.
How far do you think Mother Ostenka should go into the Baba Yaga thing? Like, should she have the chicken hut? Should she have the flying mortar and pestle? Should she, like, how far do you think when it comes, this is actually a question I've been wanting to ask you, when it comes to adapting a mythical entity in our world, a lot of people want the Warhammer version to almost be a direct 1-for-1, but I find that tends to be not the best implementations.
No, I actively dislike it. And it's not just because it shows a certain dearth of imagination, which I feel that it does, an inability to look at something and be inspired and create something new and fucking awesome. There is no doubt that one of the great strengths of the Warhammer world is that its accessibility comes from the fact that it has lots of real world references. We all know what Cathay is loosely based on. In a similar fashion, we all know what Kislev is loosely based on. But that doesn't mean that we are bound by it, nor does it mean that we have to try and represent it, because often that comes with a host of problematic issues, particularly when you've got, let's really dive into it and say one of the reasons that Games Workshop has not touched Araby is because it's potentially difficult. And it's we all know this, and we all go, we want Araby, we do, and people that are down in real world Middle Eastern countries going, we want Araby too, because they want it. But there's a certain trepidation that comes hand in hand with working with other people's cultures, and it requires a certain level of sensitivity. And the problem with going into a culture that's yours and having no sensitivity and uplifting, it gives you almost this idea that you should go and do that to someone else's too. And that's when it all starts to get difficult. So whenever I'm involved with anything, my first instinct is always to go, let's have a look at the sources. Let's look at it and think about how we can turn them into something Warhammer cool and, most importantly, completely different. I mean, really, how many bizarre Onyx Crowmen do you think you saw running around China? I mean, there wasn't a lot of them, I'm going to say. And it's good to adapt things in different ways. You've got sources and you've got inspirations, but I would much rather, if they were bringing their own Baba Yaga-esque figure to life, that it was a bigger, Warhammer-ier version of it, and it was something that you'd look at and you'd go, oh wow, that's obviously something like that, but they've done this and it's fucking cool. That's in the end what you're looking for, something that's really fucking awesome. So that would be my preference. My preference would be not to replicate, it would be to be inspired by.
Yeah. Yes, the gaggle of Crowmen.
Fucking gaggle of Crowmen. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, and yeah, one of the things that is yeah, because like when Mother Ostenka was announced, one of the things that I kind of noticed that like I saw it coming, but it was almost a little surprising to me, and I think it's because of so many people that have come into Warhammer very recently, was like the desire for her to literally be a 1-to-1 of Baba Yaga. Of like, oh well, Baba Yaga has a giant chicken hut, so her mount, her like big epic monster mount, should be a giant chicken hut creature, which is like, I can see the argument for it, but at the same time, like I don't like it, to be honest.
Nope, neither do I.
Like even if Mother Ostenka did have a chicken hut, I don't think she would take it into battle with her.
Yeah,
of like
pushing herself along with a giant mortar and pestle, and oh no.
Yeah, it's like her, like you expect this woman to take her magic house that she needs to like brew all her potions and everything, where it's gonna get like attacked by demons and blasted with cannons and shit. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's stupid.
Yeah,
Like I've seen a lot of bitching about the lack of a chicken hut. I'm going to be honest. I think the community is completely. I think they've lost the plot.
I am happy to be on a completely different page to the rest of the community here. Sometimes it's about serving the game and what's right for it rather than serving and providing fan service, for want of a better description. And in this particular instance, I think that Creative Assembly appear to be going 100% in the correct direction. And that if they were just simply representing Baba Yaga, it would be, I would argue, just dull. It wouldn't be Warhammer. It would just be a fantasy world.
I love how everyone seems to have settled on what about a chicken-legged pestle? Now we're technically different. But no, she's got a cherry that apparently sprouts spider legs. I'm totally cool with that.
That's cool. I mean, spiders. I mean, sure, why not?
Yeah, I imagine she's probably going to have a lot of. They seem to be running with a very strong animal theme for like the spirits. Which
sure, spirits are animals, right?
Yeah, of like, you know, in the trailer we could see it looks like she's got a lot of units that Drycha has, which are like creature units that do not have riders, which actually, for anyone that doesn't know, is actually a really cool callback to like really, really old fantasy, like 3rd edition, because you could actually just take a bunch of random critters in your army list back in the day.
Do that 4th as well.
I want to cook off between Ostankia and Grom. Wow, I feel like regardless of whose you ate, you would die horribly. That is not going to be a Michelin star cook-off.
Grom. Don't think of Grom as much of a cook.
No, I don't think you've played his DLC. He has a cooking mechanic, and it's hilarious.
He does not, does he?
He does. It's so funny. It is one of the most overpowered mechanics in the game. I shit you not.
I'm looking forward to playing it.
He's not the one cooking. It's more implied like his shamans, but it's Grom's cauldron mechanic. And every time you cook a meal, the voice actor for Grom, it just has Grom doing stuff in the background. He's like, that's not like, he just makes goofy comments depending on what you cook. It's fucking hilarious. Because Grom's a big boy and he's got to eat. But oh my god, yeah, the Centigore milk. Oh god. And it literally says he was a good boy. He was a good boy for Centigore milk.
That's a line.
It's foul.
There's a lot in that missing S.
It's foul, but like in the most hilarious way. Anyway. But yeah, I mean overall I am there are things I like about the Hags and things I don't like about the Hags. I think of Lore Hags would be very nice, even if we have to wait for it in the future. I think we should get it. I'm not a super huge fan that the Hags seem to be traditional wizards. There are lores
that kind of bugs me.
It's like it's just kind of lazy.
Well,
like
for me, it makes the world feel smaller and it makes the factions feel less unique and discreet. And that's a shame.
It feels more like a how do we add power to this faction and less of a how do we interpret this faction.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate.
It is, and it sort of undermines one of the core points for the Hags, and that was that they represented something that wasn't using chaos to fight chaos, which is pretty much what every other wizard was doing. They had taken a different route, and they had not fallen, so to speak. They'd done the opposite, but the cost that they had taken, instead of the risk to their soul, was completely different. It was a risk to their living lives. They become old and horrible, and their families shun them because they aren't what they once were, and they become repulsive to look at. They age, and their bones pop, and they get all crooked and bent, and, you know, it's not the best life, but that's the cost that they have chosen to take on so that they can wage their fight.
Yep. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So a couple of little things came through on Twitch. So sorry, we got a Twitch tip, which thank you, Creo. I just saw now.
Thank you very much.
I hope you're still here. He says, I consider Kislev the weakest part of Shadows of Change. My counter to that would be we haven't seen it yet. Let's wait to see what we're dealing with first. But it says Drycha came free and represented better interfaction politics than Mother Ostankia. Ostankia will probably have Gospodars making 90% of her rank and file in generals. What are my thoughts on this? Okay, so I need to wait and see what her campaign mechanics are. I need to wait and see like what she actually does How does she interact with the rest of the Kislevite units? I do deeply, deeply, deeply agree that the lack of a Hag Mother Lord is extremely disappointing. The fact that I'm going to be playing Mother Ostenka, my only choice for lords to lead my armies is boyars or ice witches, feels bad, man.
Harsh.
Like that was a huge oversight on CA's part. And that's something I'm going to be talking about a lot. So that particular part I hate a lot. I don't really have a comment for the rest of it yet. And I also don't think comparing her to Drycha is really fair. Because Drycha is a free LC character who did not bring anything genuinely new with her. She kind of cannibalized a bunch of units that were already there. Like she took forest spirits and made them purple colored. And was like, look,
that with your hags as well, though, couldn't you?
Yeah, like, and yes, they could have, and they might have, though. We don't know. We haven't seen the actual campaign yet.
You haven't seen it yet.
So that's the thing, is like, don't get me wrong, I am going to absolutely drop the proverbial hammer on it if it's trash, but I don't know if it's trash yet. There's a lot of people, I think, having very strong reactions to Shadows of Change, and at the end of the day, we just don't have all the information yet.
It's true, and plus, you got to remember, if you see something you don't like, it's very easy to start looking for further flaws. It's what you do. People can't help themselves. You see something, and you're like, well, this is shit, which means I'm going to now look at it, rake over it, and find it all to be shit. And I think that Sotek here has got, I would argue, a very balanced view, which is, yes, it does look like it might be poor, but let's wait to find out if it's actually the case, because you might be surprised.
All right, so I think we're going to go ahead.
Just got a new YouTube one in.
Oh,
ping, 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 ping.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Raw Cauliflower.
If I could invent a generic agent/hero that was either created by or works mostly for the Hags, what would I come up with? So, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would probably just have like Hag Mothers as my lord and then Hag Witches as my heroes and then call it a day. If I was held at gunpoint and told that I had to come up with a entity as like a spiritual creature to act as like a hero character, I would probably crack open and go read about all the spirits that are in realms of Kislev and just pick one of them. There are quite a few of them, but like that doesn't really fit.
Yeah, if I was there, if you could invent a generic agent hero character that was either created by or mostly works for the Hags, then what would you come up with? I'd just have a full set of Hags.
Yeah.
And you would have the Hags balancing out against the just the standard Ungol nobility, you boyars et al. And that would just be a perfect balance between the two. Why go further? And then if you wanted to add on top of that, I'd be looking at being things that the Hags summoned / created through the course of play, rather than necessarily was a component part of the leadership structure.
Yeah. No, that being said, if you gave me money and were like, hey, if I was like, hey, can I do like an Ungol, like whatever the leader of a little Ungor tribe is, and he's specialized in being like a ranged melee focused character, like he has a bow and he can ride a horse and
if you get yourself like a proper character who could start doing proper Ungol tactics of circling around units and pinging into it, going round formations, having special stuff, and then the character who did something special to that. Perhaps if they managed to connect to themselves, a big ping went off, magic powers fling off. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So that's probably what I would do if I got that in addition to the Hags. I would do the Hags first, but if you were like, you can have another one, but it has to serve the Hags, then yeah, I would probably do like not a chieftain, I don't know what the word would be, but like an Ungol guy.
An Ataman would do.
Sure, an Ataman. Oh, well, we have Atamans.
Or Hetman.
There we go. We don't have Hetmans. There you go. Hetman.
We have ourselves an Ungol Hetman. That would do.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and start diving into questions from the Discord, as well as here's a great question to start with. That's just from the YouTube chat. If you want to tackle that, Andy, of do Hag spirits require the winds of magic?
Okay. Yes, spirits use the winds of magic. They are inherently magical themselves. They are, depending upon your individual story that you take from, because they really do contradict, but they are at their heart creatures that either A, come from the aether, or are very closely related to the aether, but they definitely draw their sustenance and are a part of etheric energies. And that basically means, in the Warhammer world, the winds of magic. The reason that the hags are safe is because it's the spirits that are doing the spells, which is why I'm not too bothered with the hags having access to, say, the lore of beasts or the lore of life or whatever, as long as you have that little snippet that says the spirits are doing it on their behalf. If you write that bit in, suddenly the hag makes complete sense as a character. But if the hag herself is the one that's responsible for doing it, it undermines the whole point of what they're there for. At least as they were originally written, they might write a new one.
Yeah. What is the relationship between Ice Witch and the hags? This is actually pretty well expanded on in Realms of the Ice Queen. It is tense.
Tense.
Like they technically are fighting for the same cause, but they represent two very different cultures.
And you've got to also remember that the Ice Court is in the position of authority, which, if anything, makes it even more tense. As far as they're concerned, it is their land. As far as the Ungals are concerned, it's their land and it was stolen from them.
Yeah. Are we not all hags deep down? I'm sure we all have days like that. All right, so diving into the first question, some of these might not fully show up, but I don't worry, I have the Discord up, so I will read them out in their entirety. But Scythe Petals dropped in a few questions, and his first one is, what is the hag's role in Kislev society? Are they simply boogie ladies, or do they have a deeper, more secret role unbeknownst to even civilized, quote-unquote, Kislevites? I'll just leave that up.
So that's an interesting question, because Kislev society is quite different to, say, Gospodar society or Ungal society, both of which are Kislev society.
Yeah, Kislev's messy, y'all.
Yeah, totally. And that's just two of the primary ethnicities that you find in Kislev. There are more, and they also have their own traditions and their own histories. The hags are an essential part of Ungal life. It's not just that they're sitting on the outside. They live with them. It is their mothers, it is their sisters, it is their children. The wise women that they all represent, the circles of wise women that are in their communities, that the hags are a part of. Even the oldest and weirdest ones are connected to one somewhere. It's just a part of their society. It's not an external weird thing. It's what they live with. But for the Gospodars, it is almost to a degree exactly what you described there. Bogey ladies, things to be afraid of. What happens when you stray too far off into the Oblast and you get into the weird communities where things are strange? They are often not just bogey ladies because they're used as a figure of terror, but they are real threats to their way of life and the life that they live. So it's tense.
Yeah, and just gonna touch on a couple of comments very, very briefly as they appear in the chat as well. Kyle, yes, that's actually a dynamic that Total War has added that I like a lot, is the Great Orthodoxy. The Great Orthodoxy is literally like the third guy in the ring now, where they are, especially with Kostaltin at the head, they are very zealotrous, and they have similarities to the Empire as far as like how the witch hunters tend to be. But there is almost more of a scheming nature to the Orthodoxy, because Kostaltin is not what he seems. We've talked about him with I had Andy Hall on, and I've done a lot into Kostaltin, and we'll eventually do kind of a Total War lore focus stream with Andy here. But this Andy, but
too many Andys.
Yeah, the Great Orthodoxy very much is trying to claim power. It is become a political faction in addition to a religious faction, and it sees those two as opponents. And you also have someone like Kostaltin who has become convinced that he literally sees chaos everywhere. Which, to be fair, he's not entirely wrong.
I mean, the end of the world's coming. He's not wrong at all.
Yeah. Does hag magic work outside of Kislev? Have they ever been seen outside of the motherland?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, it does. Their magic relies upon spirits. Their magic does not rely upon their position. And the spirits of the ancient widow are just one part of a far greater map. And their ability to manipulate spirits do not rely upon the ancient widow. They rely upon their knowledge of how spirits work, of their knowledge about how to manipulate spirits. Does that mean that when they leave, that they're perhaps going to be encountering different spirits that work slightly differently? Yes. Does that mean that they still know how to control them? Yes. The Might not be successful, but they know what to do.
Yep. So what is so this says robsmen, but I think he means ropesmen. What is the difference? Like what are those? The Dolgan, the ropsmen get brought up. Even in Total War, they're brought up a fair bit.
Yeah, they are.
So what are they?
They're other tribes. So if we go back way back in time, like I like to do, and we go back to the time of Sigmar. In the time of Sigmar, the entirety of the Reich Basin, and the Reich Basin is a loose way of describing everything inside the World's Edge Mountains, into the Black Mountains, up to the Grey Mountains, because the Erskoi, the various rivers of Kislev, most of those also flow into the River Reich at some point through the River Talabek. So that entire area was populated by a variety of different human tribes. Several of those tribes were bound by Sigmar together into an empire, but a lot of them were not. And that is what these other peoples are. These are the other tribes, all of which had their own unique, discrete cultures, civilizations, identities, some of which have been completely crushed, some of which exist to this day. And the Sylvanian independence, for example, comes from the fact that they had a different tribe down there, the Fenones, which are not often spoken about either. And they are the foundation point of what became the Sylvanian people, which are quite separate to the Azaborns that live beside them round about Stirling, and then down into Averland as well, with the Cherusins over there, and you get the idea. So they're just another tribe with another cultural identity.
Yeah, so I've seen this question show up in a lot of different ways, which I will take a whack at before Andy does, because I think there's some interesting stuff there of Munamim, which Andy, I don't know if you've read Munamim, but
nope,
she is...
I have not. So that's going to make it super easy for me not to give an answer on.
Cool. Well, you'll be able to jump into it in a second. So would Munamim resonate with Mother Kislev if her bog expansion reached Kislev to the point she became a hag, or would their grief be incompatible? So Munamim, for those who don't know, is a special character that was introduced in the Winds of Magic book for Warhammer Roleplay 4th edition, who is a Famir matriarch. So she's the Famir, she's the big bad Famir matriarch character. She's actually very, very fun and an interesting character. But there is, like Andy talked about earlier, there is a huge difference between the Famir and the Hags, in that the Famir use chaos. They are one of the original chaos races on the Warhammer planet. They, according to newer lore we have, they worshiped chaos before chaos even showed up. Like, they had little inklings of little whispers of what was beyond the veil. And they were one of the first favored races that fell out of favor and were replaced by humanity, which is why the Famir really hate humanity in a lot of ways. They're very they have a lot in common with the Beastmen, though they're very different, because the Famir are technically civilization builders, which, as Beastmen seem to get really uppity about that. But I would say I could understand people thinking that there's a similarity there, in that the Famir do use demons. They do use like bog spirits or marsh creatures, fen beasts, though fen beasts are more like automatons. They're not really spirits. They're more magical constructs that are they're not like dryads. It's more of you're using magic to give shape to a creature that does not usually have its own sentience. It's like a golem. Whereas the Hags are working with non-chaos spirits. That is the big, like, Hags are working with spirits, Famir are working with demons. But there are some really interesting similarities between the two.
Seems fair. I shan't comment. Haven't read that bit. That was easy.
But I would like your comment on Famir versus Hags.
Right, yeah. So they're a completely different kettle of fish. The Famir have gone through various iterations of their background, some of which are really unfortunate, to the point that I almost decided to nix them entirely for 4th edition fantasy roleplay. Because I'm
glad y'all just fixed them instead.
Yeah, indeed. They got run with instead. There's still a part of me that wishes I hadn't. Because I once received an email from someone who said, I really wished you hadn't, and I was like,
well, yeah.
It was a pretty sad email, and their reasons were very good. And I was like, yeah, I get what you're meaning. I now feel really bad. But nevertheless, that aside, because it was a moment where it made me realize that perhaps I should get over things that I like and just accept that some things aren't acceptable. And that aside, they've gone through various iterations, and some iterations, they were once human. In other iterations, they were Skaven. In other iterations, Marienburg and the entire Cursed Marshes, the fact it's the Cursed Marshes is because of the Fimmer. They had a huge civilization there that collapsed near the beginning of, let's say, things. So they are an interesting species, let's say that, and they are very now closely related to chaos, which is a bit of a shame given where they were originally coming from with their Celtic mythology, with the Fomorians, which is what they were loosely based on. And they were originally created, I've spoken to their creators more than once. I have the original Fimmer art sitting behind me, for example.
Yes, you do.
That's the very first image that was ever created for Fimmer to try and conceptualize them. That's the original piece. They've gone through so many changes, often because they've been attempted to try and fix what came before, that it's difficult to pin down any one as any definite thing, because the war game itself has never picked it up and said, this is what they are now. So every version we have is just an iteration that has yet to be properly calcified. So with that all said, and with that awareness in place, I think that the Hags would do absolutely everything in their power to annihilate them.
Yeah. And yeah, I would 100% agree. And
annihilate them.
Yeah, and for those that are curious about like Total War Premiere, and you're kind of like, ooh, where do they come from in that case? The Total War Premiere, the version we have of them now are ripped right out of the Monstrous Arcanum. And the Storm of Magic book. It is the most recent interpretation, and they removed a lot from the Fimir.
Almost everything.
There was a lot, kind of, to not necessarily bounce around it, but there was a lot of like unfortunate sexual themes to the Fimir about like how they procreated involving unwilling humans. That got and it was like overtly graphic back in the day. Old like it's just kind of a unfortunate truth of the setting that old Warhammer had a lot of very strong sexual themes because it was marketed seemingly towards teenage boys, and they went in some weird directions with it a lot. Like if you read some of the old Dark Elf books and stuff, there are some things that nowadays you might go, whoa, that's a lot. And a lot of those have been removed in the modern setting. And heavily cleaned up because we just didn't need to go there. And so the Fimir got almost completely rebranded. And they went from that to being instead like a fallen civilization of chaos worshipping marsh creatures that are a matriarchal society. They have these big badass matriarchs that lead them, who are the progenitors of their species, and also like they have a bunch of little males, and they kind of function like ants in that sense, where you have a big queen who gives birth to all of them and all this other stuff, and instead they just sacrifice humans for magic and power now, which is much more normal for a fantasy setting. Like that's fine. They got rid of a lot of the other stuff, which I think is good. So that is why if you encounter the Fimir in Total War, you might look at them and go, I don't understand why people have problems with these guys. They seem fine and like really cool. But that's why, is their origin was very heavily tied with a lot of those other themes. And those have been gutted in the modern versions.
Although, interestingly, more than one writer, when I was working on the roleplay game, tried to reinstall that.
Yeah, well, you know,
I did not allow that to occur.
You know, it's kind of that thing of if there's always the guy, and it's always a guy, in the room who goes, well, this doesn't make me uncomfortable, so why shouldn't we talk about it as a theme when it happens in real life? And it's like, because we don't have to go there. That's why you can tell horrific stories without delving to the absolute bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, you can tell horrific stories without making it a core component. Those horrific stories can still be told. They just don't have to be the only outcome that's allowed, because that is not just a horrific story. That's then moving into actual abuse.
Yeah. Also, Fade to Black is a very good, viable strategy, and it was not a strategy used enough in the 80s and 90s. And now they're better about it, depending on the medium. Granted, not always. You know, there are some stories that delve into topics like that, but there's a time and a place. Would be my thing there. All right. That Rye Guy, thank you for the super chat.
Hey, Rye Guy.
Sorry, this was asked or talked about already. Came in late, but I thought ice magic came from Kislev. Don't the spirits of Kislev have some access to ice magic as well? If so, why do ice magic, which is hate the magics of the hags? I'll let Andy.
So this is an
TLDR
interesting one, because this is one that I discussed actually directly with Games Workshop when I was writing the Kislev material, because we had Form of the Frost Fiend, for example, which is one of the spells of the Ice Witches, where they could turn into a gigantic Frost Fiend, and it was fucking cool. But the Frost Fiend is a legit spirit in Kislev. It's not just something that is made up for the Ice Witches. Frost Fiends whirl around being crazy whirlwinds of horrific icy death, with massive claws. They're truly terrible creatures, but they're spirits. They're spirits of ice, spirits of Kislev. And when I was forming up the hags, I was very keen for them to be quite discreet from the Ice Witches. But I was aware that the existing background said it was a spirit, and if we had this particular issue, that there may be a bridge there. So I said, I want to separate them. I want to do it for this reason, to make sure that they're discreet. And my justification for it at that point was that the ice... Let's see, how can I say this without necessarily stating where we were going there? That the ice magic source was definitely, and the spirits therein was definitely separate to the Ancient Widow and the spirits that they were working with, and that there was two separate factions working there. Now, were they necessarily two components of the same thing? That Holy Trinity we mentioned very early in the stream? Possibly. But the justification was that they were discreet. Different type of spirit.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people like modern Famir. Because, yeah, Skeksis, great. Awesome.
Skeksis are awesome. If only they were more like that. But they're very strongly drawn upon old Irish myth.
Yes. Though, yeah, they kind of lost a lot of that.
Yeah, totally.
Like, I kind of hope they lean. Well. I hope they lean more into it. But
yeah, they. As just a small aside, the reason that they got rid of them was there was only one. The models were made of metal, and they required monster bases, so they were expensive. So in terms of collecting the army, it cost too much. Nobody bought the army, so they got dumped.
Man, if only they had waited for their moment.
Yeah, if only they'd made the models slightly smaller, we would probably still have them today.
Yeah. Though I keep expecting them to return for AOS or something. Like, they've been lurking in the background forever. Anyway, moving on with questions from the Discord. Oh, banners, that's where I need to go. Do the hags worship and acknowledge the Kislevite deities? This is actually a really interesting question, because a lot of people may not know the Ungol's, their gods were already there. Like Urson, Dawes. Actually, I don't know if all four of them, right. But technically so, there's 5.
There's more than 5. There's like about 50.
Sorry,
there's the ones.
There's the 3 biggies, and then there's the 2 not as biggies, and then there's all the other ones.
Indeed, and the answer is stop thinking that they worship gods. Number 1. Because they kind of don't. They're a polytheistic society. They worship all the gods. It's written directly in about the Ungol's, for example. They're Atmans, the people who are, let's say, the oldest member of the community. The village elder is responsible for speaking to the gods on behalf of the entire community when things are going wrong. If a harvest goes wrong, if they need more fish, if something goes wrong, they will immediately try to communicate with and deal with that god and ask why it's all gone wrong. They'll be making offerings. They'll be doing things to try and appease the god. The gods are not necessarily worshipped. They're mostly appeased. They're called upon in times of need. And it's not so much that, oh, this is a community that worships Daz. It's all of them. All of the gods, every single time, for every member of the community. It's a polytheistic society, not a monotheistic society. So get that into your head, and hopefully that will answer it almost by default. So the answer is yes to all of it.
Yeah. And yeah, the hags, very involved. Like, they're gods too. A lot of people think that there is a definitive split between religion and magic in Warhammer, and that's not true.
It isn't a lot.
It does come up a lot, but like a lot of the colleges of magic, certain colleges are very heavily associated with certain gods. Of like the Amethyst College and Moor Cult, they are very bro.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're very bro. I'd say that they're more in the same area.
Well, to my understanding, it's like it's considered like not kosher to not be involved with the Cult of Moor as an Amethyst wizard, because people start to get suspicious. of like, even so far as what's her face from Tarmacon is like, she refuses to work with Amethyst College, but she works really in tandem with the Cult of Mor.
Yeah. Individuals in that regard, yeah. I would say it's a bit more complicated than that alone. That would be a bit tight. There is definitely a strong cultural divide in many parts of the old world, but it's difficult to pin it down because in, say, for example, the Empire, it's exceedingly strong. Because of the prevalence of the cult of Sigmar that views magic as the workings of chaos. And as much as individuals in the cults are accepting of it, many just aren't. And it's maybe been 200 years since Magnus has made it legal, but those last 200 years for many of them have been a fight to reverse it. And the colleges have been shut more than once, closed down almost entirely during the course of that 200 years. And that's because they are seen as massively sacrilegious because they're pulling on the powers of chaos. Now, not everybody believes that. And many, particularly the wizards themselves, don't necessarily believe that per se, meaning that they might want to help. And there's some places they'll be accepted, but the overall view in the Empire, if you're looking at a cultural umbrella view, is wizards are bad. And that goes across the case for all the cults, sadly, because but that's the Empire only. Other places, it's quite different.
You know, I almost think it, and when I've read it, especially like in the Empire Army book and stuff. By the way, I hate you for this comment, Crescent.
Seriously.
But one of the things I guess a better way to put it, I think I put it wrong. I think a better way to put it is there seem to be some colleges of magic that I wouldn't necessarily say they almost use the faith as a shield, but they almost kind of have it as a validation of their existence because of certain, like, either they have very similar aims or they have very similar opponents.
Yeah, and I think that's correct. And you've got to remember that the wizards, it's really easy to forget that they also live in a polytheistic society. They have been raised in a society where all of these gods are real, a part of their lives, a part of their culture. And just because you become a wizard doesn't mean you stop worshipping all of these gods. Now, again, I use the word worship incorrectly, as I did previously. I've just fallen into the own trap that I said others shouldn't do. But they will be looking to appeal to those gods under certain circumstances. Just because they're wizards doesn't mean that comes to an end. And they're going to be looking to get help from those that are similar to them. The reasons that the Amethyst College and the Cult of Mor are so close is because they are so close, but that doesn't mean that one doesn't think that the other is wrong in a great deal many things as an overall institution.
Because there are certain college or winds of magic, or well, from an Empire perspective, you know, it's like the Morites and the Amethyst College tend to be very heavily aligned. The Jade College and like Ryan's tend to be heavily aligned, but like, you know, it's like the Fire College very rarely seems to be aligned with any of the cults.
I mean, the one that probably would be burn inside of Sigmar. That's still not happening.
But anyway, so
the Grays with Marina sort of does this.
Yes. Yep. So, but yes, Hags. I would say the Hags do have a good, like the Hags were there first, as were the Kislevite gods. But something that Andy was talking about earlier that is really interesting, though, is that Total War lore is moving the setting forward in the sense that there is now a schism happening because of Kostaltin and the Great Orthodoxy, which was not what it was supposed to be. Like when Boris Ursus created it, he created it under the guise of chaos was using the cults as a way to kind of weave its way into a lot of groups. So Boris thought, well, if we standardize the cults, if we make it where they have written down teachings and they're all doing the same stuff and it's not different from village to village to village, then it'll be much harder for the chaos cultists to sneak their way in while pretending to be parts of our cults. But when Boris died and the orthodoxy was kind of left on its own and Katerin took over, the orthodoxy looked over and went, oh, we like all this power we have now. By standardizing, we can wield a lot of authority because now we say what's right, we say what's wrong. And they started turning their attention to all of these other groups in Kislev and going, no, we don't like that because either A, we don't understand it, or B, we don't control it.
And ultimately it'll be control as well. That's the big one.
Yeah. And so there's a very interesting thing of there is all these gods, but if they don't kind of kowtow to the Great Orthodoxy, or the Great Orthodoxy either doesn't feel like they can control them or manipulate them, they're going to try stomping them out. And like that would potentially lead, like, I almost kind of wish the Great Orthodoxy had happened a generation earlier so we could see more of the fallout.
Yeah,
because
I
like,
agree, because there's not enough time, because the world comes to an end.
Yeah, I wish it had been something that Tsar Alexei had done after the Great War against Kislev. That would have been a really good time to come up with that. Unfortunately, we have it with Tsar Boris, which does make Tsar Boris even cooler than he already was. But yeah, it would lead to some really interesting schisms.
Yeah, and I agree completely. I think that it's a fascinating direction, and I kind of wish it had been brought in 200 years earlier, because that would have brought it would have, to a degree, also justified the weird way that whenever Kislev is brought up with its religion, which it has been in multiple cases, it's always been loosely and ill-defined. And it would have been nice to see how the religious aspects have been controlled and manipulated by what is effectively Kislev's version of the cult of Sigmar.
Yeah, which if y'all haven't already, I'll have to do like a video dedicated to it at some point, or maybe we can even talk with any Law about it, just about how he feels about certain ideas and stuff. But some of the ideas they're running with in the background that you can see hidden throughout Total War, as well as conversations about some of the writings they've been doing, is that like they're not everyone in the cults is going along with Kostaltin and his consolidation. Like I want to say it's either the matriarch of Solyak, or it is the I can't remember if it's a matriarch or patriarch of Tor, is really uncomfortable with the Great Consolidation and the direction it's going in, where it's becoming more of a political force instead of a like purifying force. And Kostaltin has enemies that are very big in the other cults, and the thing I love about Kostaltin, and one day we'll have to do a whole thing with him, is that like he looks like he's Rasputin. He looks like Rasputin. He's like, a lot of people think he's this crazy zealot guy, but that's just the face he puts on. Like he is very zealotrous. Like he's a very, very strong, faithful man, but he's also a way bigger schemer than anybody thinks he is. Like in private, he is not nearly that loud and boastful and unwashed and ugly. That is an appearance he puts on. He is far more conniving than he seems, which is what makes him a great character. I just hope he gets better mechanics. So we're going to skip this one from Scythe because we already answered it. We already talked about the Ancient Widow a lot and how she's associated. This is also from Scythe. Are the Hags Kislev's lizardmen? That's such a funny way to put it. As in they're serving a bigger crucial plan for protecting the motherland that most Kislevites don't largely see and understand.
I would say no. In fact, I would say quite strongly no. In that these are a bunch of individual women who are looking to do the best in the circumstances that they have. We are dealing with people who are mostly, if you want to look at where they sit in the Warhammer world, in the northern side of Kislev that's butting up to Troll Country, working across a host of Stanistas of Ungol backing mostly. And they have constant drivings coming from the north of Chaos attacks, from Norse attacks, from various other attacks that are coming down. The spring driving every year, bringing the rather nasty Chaos Marauders. And that is their daily grist. That is what they have to deal with. This isn't some potential threat that might be coming. It's coming again and again. Every year, they're raising up new rotas of horse archers. Gospodars are coming in from the south, and they're coming in with their winged lancers et al. And they're going to, not necessarily war, but most certainly protect themselves from marauders that are coming in. They have got far too much on their plate to be working towards some greater plan. The great spirits that they work on are there to hopefully help them, but they're also deeply difficult to deal with. They are a difficult set of people with lots of different traditions who are constantly arguing with each other because their existences are constantly threatened. I would not look at them as having some great plan. I would instead say they're just people who are surviving in a hellscape.
Yep. Servant of Sotek, yep, that's absolutely true. Yeah, even the Cult of Urson is very split. When Kostaltin was made Patriarch of the Cult of Urson and Supreme Patriarch of the Great Orthodoxy, there were people that like flat out were like, nope, and they left for the wilds. But granted, the Cult of Urson is actually very vulnerable because it's kind of a baby right now. Because
It kind of is.
Yeah, it was functionally dead for a while until Tsar Boris was the first priest of Urson in like what 100 years, 200 years. I think it's 100. But like
by the wayside, and the lore that they picked up on, it largely fell by the wayside because the ice witches, if you go back to the intentions before we arrived where Total War took it from, but the ice witches had manipulated themselves into positions of absolute power across all of Kislev, and a part of that proposition for them was wiping out alternatives to their power bases, and that included the cult of Urson. The reason that the cult of Urson died was almost certainly the good old Sisterhood of Ice.
Yeah, I don't think they were thrilled about what Boris did, but it adds a lot of extra spice for
it's brilliant.
Sultan. Yeah,
and it adds a lot of spice to Boris as well, because he comes along and he's the Tsar. What the fuck can they do?
That is it is the most hilarious story that he just. I'm sure it wasn't this, but the way it's written, it almost seems like he just woke up one day and was like, I'm going to go fight a bear. And he just
got my bear.
He's like, I'm going to go become a priest of Urson. I'll be right back.
And I've come back home. Oh, my bear.
And Vorn, yes. Yeah. The short story about Kostaltin does end with him realizing that he's been manipulated in a sense, because he accuses he hates Katerin. He hates Katerin a lot, and it's because he sees her as a puppet of the Ice Court. He doesn't he understands that she's Tsar Boris's daughter, but as far as he's concerned, she's a witch and she is a pawn of horrible things. And so he kind of becomes convinced that it's worth any lengths in order to expose her corruption. And by doing that, he ends up killing some people he probably shouldn't have killed. And that is what causes him to flee to Castle Alexandrov. Is he pulls away because he realizes that the political situation of the cult is threatened, and he needs to pull back and consolidate his power, so that he does it right, so to speak. But I think it's not so much about that he thought that going after Katerin was wrong. I think he became more certain of the position that he could not just murder Katerin. He needed to be more subtle about it. He needed to strip her from power, not murder her in cold blood in the capital. Chicken-legged huts, do they exist in the lore? I've never seen them, but that doesn't mean they're not there. If you want them to be there, they're probably there. That being said, I could absolutely see the idea that if there is a hag that has a stationary hut and she needs to move for some reason, that there is a spirit she can call upon that literally picks up her house and moves it.
Damn fucking straight. And I could definitely see how that could be. And in fact, I as much as I was flippantly going fuck off, quite literally, flippantly, I almost certainly would write it in if I was doing something, but I wouldn't write it as a chicken-legged hut. I'd be writing it in some other fashion, and spirits are the way forward.
Yeah. Like, has it happened? Probably. Is it something that you would see on the battlefield? Probably not. And then your next question is the lore of hags a practical battle lore? We already talked about this. Not really, but in Total War, it probably would be. But that's a limitation of Total War. But that being said, hags would be absolutely fucking terrifying to fight. And
I think there's no reason
extremely deadly.
Yeah, no reason it couldn't be. It'd be an easy thing to do. If
it would, it would not. If you were fighting against them and you understood how magic worked, it would not look like a battle lore. It would be more
really weird.
Yeah, it would be her calling upon spirits that you probably couldn't see to interact with the real world, and it would probably be scary as fuck.
And you'd be dealing with a lot of your dispels, so to speak, would be working against the spirits themselves, not the hags. That are doing things on the hag's behalf. It's all very complicated and different.
It would actually be a lot of fun from a role play or storytelling perspective, because a lot of the usual ways to stop a witch or a wizard would not work on the hag.
Superb. And that's the fun things about the roleplay game, is showing how you can do things differently and diving into those details. Levels of fun.
Yep. Anything interesting / unique about Mother Ostankia? So something I can tell you about her, because she's brand new. But things that I can tell you about her is that from the trailer that's very well written is that Mother Ostankia appears to be extremely old. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say she's the original hag, but she's probably probably the oldest one that's around. because she seems to have utterly sacrificed her humanity to become what she is. And if you watch the trailer, you'll note that if it can be, it's a little subtle, so you might not catch it. But what happens in the trailer is that the changeling turns into an ice witch to burn down, as goofy as that is, a sacred site to the spirits in Kislev. He corrupts it. And the Akshina see it, and the Akshina do not understand what's going on. They are not wizards. They have to interpret the situation. So they go to Mother Ostenkia and they tell her, hey, we saw an ice witch destroying a sacred grove. And if you watch, you can actually see her expression go like from listening to concerned to fucking pissed. And then she follows the changeling who is in that form back to a city, and she fucking obliterates it because they violated the pact with the spirits and they are a risk to Kislev itself. Which shows that she is extremely powerful, and also she does not fuck around. There is no mercy from Mother Ostenkia.
And also extremely easy to manipulate.
Yeah. Granted, she didn't see it. And honestly, to her...
Oh, did that happen?
Yeah.
Excellent. Burn! Seriously. It was a joke, actually.
Yeah. I would not be surprised if Mother Ostenkia is probably such a not fan of what Kislev has become. She probably does not like the giant cities that push back nature, chop down the trees, divert the rivers, change everything around them so they can be civilized. She probably resents that very heavily. So she probably doesn't take much of a push to destroy certain cities. This question has nothing to do with that, but we'll answer it anyway. Corn's a number 8 fan.
Yep.
How does Corn's magic work? Is it like a I'm not really sure what this question is asking now that I'm looking at it.
That's certainly a lot of words.
Yeah.
I would suggest if you've got something you specifically want to know, try again. Because it's difficult to determine whether you're asking how does Corn magic work.
Oh, no. Sorry. I just realized Corn's number 8 fan is the person. Okay. Sorry.
Oh,
I was so
much
confused.
More sense.
Yeah. So his question is,
you need a colon or something in there.
Yes, I should have had a dash. How does the Hags magic work? Is it like a custom mesh of the other winds? We've already talked about this.
We've talked about
spirits.
That one. Yeah.
I was like, what the hell is this saying? Jake asks, are the Hags freaks in the sheets?
Well, interestingly, one of their spells is an ability to make themselves look like they're beautiful and young. It's one of the classic fairy tales of someone popping into the forest and being attracted off so that they can have children. And it's a very sad tale. And the answer is probably as much as anyone can be.
Yep. They're still human, at least for the most part.
Yes.
Servitor, what is the Hag's hair routine like?
I imagine it's coming out.
Yeah, probably not great. Probably not great.
As I recall from the hag marks, it's a wee while since I wrote those. Whenever hags screwed up their castings, the spirits would ravage them. And things would go very bad, and they picked up marks as in they aged and they aged and they aged as the spirits ravaged them. And one of them is, as I recall, their hair eventually just completely falls out in horrible patches and clumps.
Yeah, they probably have some hair, but it's probably very patchy and awful.
Yeah, just poor.
And I mean, just think what happens to people's hair when they get really, really old. It becomes like really lanky and kind of lifeless, and it's hard to work with and stuff.
You start going bald in places, and
the Blood God Scourge are the things that occasionally go in or out of the woods connected to the hags. Traditionally they were not, but they are a suitable stand-in for we need to make battle units out of spirits.
I think that pretty much any existing spirit unit will be more than usable by the hags should they decide to do so. Assuming they run with them, they might decide to curtail them and never use them again after this.
Yeah, I would actually be totally fine with seeing Drycha's malevolent dryads and malevolent treemen as a option, as well as like all the animal units they seem to be getting as well.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Yeah, sure.
Jar Jar Skinks is hag magic, color magic. No, we've already talked about spirits. Corn's number 8 fan. This time I did have a dash.
Well done.
Are they like chaos mutated, or are they just like that? It's part of their bargain with the spirits. They sacrifice their youth in exchange, often in exchange, because that's the only
And
thing.
when they do things incorrectly, the spirits literally suck the frickin' life out of them.
Yeah, the spirits are just super cool and nice like that. Is the changeling that good at transforming into others that even those magically gifted could not tell? Yes.
So
well,
the answer
depends.
is yes.
Yeah.
And the reason I say yes for this one in particular is the changeling's good enough to fool the gods themselves. But if I was going to be really, you know, say for example, if I was going to look for the loophole in the bargain, you know, that little thing that says there is someone who could do it, I would probably choose a hag, because the hags are the ones that have been trained and excel most in the sight. They're the ones that deal with and can look directly into the spirit realm. So of any of them, possibly the ones that can detect chaos more than anyone else, arguably in the known world, maybe the hags could catch them.
Yeah,
but probably.
Honestly, the trailer probably played its cards better than it meant to by having Mother Ostankia not the one that saw the changeling, but the Akshina.
Cool.
Whereas Yuan Bo does see the changeling, and he doesn't realize it's the changeling as the Onyx Crowman.
For quite some time, yeah, totally.
Yeah, well, in the short story
as well.
Yeah, he doesn't realize it until the changeling makes a mistake.
I've now read it, by the way.
Yeah, oh yes, Andy did finally read it. Gaggle. Yep.
Fucking gaggle.
Godzilla 2021. Did I see the new Quaddle mod? Yes, it's amazing. Oh my god, Andy, you've never heard my. So we don't have time for it. There's a very infamous rant of mine. I really don't like the designs.
Rant.
I do not like the designs of the lizardmen in some cases.
You're going to get me starting with the design of Marathi next, aren't you?
Yeah, I do not like the Quaddle in particular. Made me fucking furious because we have so much artwork of the Quaddle as a flying serpent with feathered wings.
Makes sense.
And instead, they gave it a bird beak because there was a White Dwarf article where a Games Workshop employee made a model of a Quaddle for tabletop, and he used the old Chaos Dragon sculpt, which had kind of beaky mouths because they had really pointy mouths.
Yep, I know.
And because of that, he painted the mouth yellow like a beak. So some dipshit at CA was like, "Oh, it's a beak," even though every single piece of artwork they have serpent mouths.
Well, that's horseshit.
Yeah, it gets me. I also hate the way Croc scores look because they're not. I don't like how Creative Assembly. I love Creative Assembly very deeply, but the way they interpreted some of the Lizardman stuff, they were like, "Oh, a Croc score is a crocodile that stood up on its hind legs," and that's not what they are. They're not. Okay, they're aliens.
So I'm really glad you're saying that because I'm inevitably going to be one hell of a ranter too, and it makes me feel good that someone else does it.
Oh my god, yeah, dude. There is a huge meme where people love just coming into my streams for Total War and being like, "Why?" Like, I think Total War Croc scores are better than original ones, and I just go off every single time. I can't help myself. But we have to move on. All right. Can an Ice Witch become a hag, or once you become one, can you never become the other?
Well, that's an interesting point.
That is an interesting question.
So, right. So the Ice Witches are pretty much exclusively Gospodars. Pretty much. The entire process is that the Gospodars go out, look for Gospodar girls, find them, take them away, and train them. So on that side, you're pretty much stuck as one thing. And the chances of you then, bizarrely, somehow culturally getting wrapped up with the hags, I think is so exceedingly low that it's almost not worth saying yes to. But one of the great joys of Warhammer is taking a look at all the existing models and asking, what if? And several of the better characters that have been created down through the course of time for Games Workshop various products have been characters that bridge that what if question. And the what if question could be what if an Ice Witch rebelled from the court, for example, and found herself in a position where she made some deals with a completely different form of Kislev. And I think that could come up with some really interesting answers. An Ice Witch, old crone who comes in from the icy wastes, I think could fit thematically very well. You'd want a really good story for how it came about, though. And you'd want something that was thematically interesting and impactful because it would be a big event.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to address this. So, first of all, you're entitled to your opinion, but it doesn't mean your opinion isn't fucking garbage. Second of all, Games Workshop has settled this debate for us in that there are now two distinct species of Kroxigor. There are classic Kroxigor, and then there are long snout Kroxigors that still look way fucking better than the garbage shit Total War ones, which are called the they're like Sotek spawn. They're a mark of Sotek Kroxigor. I can't remember their technical title, but no. The thing is, the Total War Kroxigors are a cool creature, but they're not Kroxigors. I will fucking shoot you. Mods, just if anybody else says they like them, just start banning them. Yeah, Kroxigor War Spawn. Thank you. Yeah, those are the new breed, but they still don't look like the Total War ones because the Total War ones are fucking trash. They're fat and they have no necks and they're not nearly. They're just wrong.
You're making me cry here.
Yeah. Anyway,
they're wrong.
They're just wrong. It drives me crazy.
Your opinion's garbage.
So Kroxigors with beaks, it would be about as offensive to me as the current ones. The only Kroxigor in the game that I like is Nakai. And even Nakai I think could be better because he doesn't have a lot of the telltale features of Kroxigor, but he is not as bad just because he's so big.
I'm really looking forward to streaming with playing the Lizardmen and loving the models. maybe that's beauty. That's just gonna be our first co-op stream. Is one of us is gonna play Lizardmen and we're not gonna play any of the game. We're just gonna bitch the entire time. Six Shot, what is the nicest and evilest thing a hag has ever done? I think there's a really we'd have to I don't know, go read a book. But I will say this. Kislev itself, one of its strong themes is that Kislev is a land that does not coddle fools. Even their god of mercy, Solyak, who's kind of like the Kislevite equivalent to Shalia in a sense, she is a god that does not heal you and does not save you if you were a dumbass. She will let you die and she will let you suffer because you should have known better. And the hags are part of that. If you are a damn fool, if you do not follow the warnings, if you do not behave, you will suffer immensely, and it's your own goddamn fault. So they're as nice or as in quotations, evil as people. They're just people. They're living in communities. They're just people. Don't try and other them too much. They are just people.
Yep. Though, if you want a good example of like a tragic one, like I said, go read Graham McNeil's Sigmar story. The witch in that knows something is going to happen and she sets it in motion and it is dark. But she does it to save the empire. So it's complicated. Dragon Turtle, do Norskins / other tribes also make use of the lore of hags?
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a really good one, actually, because it's the one you immediately go, no, don't be daft. But there's a lot of bleed between the various cultures and peoples that make their lives in and around Troll Country, the south of Norska, southwest, I suppose, of southeast, pardon me, of Norska, down into Kislev. And there's a lot of Norse blood running through the Ungals in the north, and there's a lot of Ungal blood running through the Norse in the south. And I think the answer to that is almost certainly not openly, but there's probably a few around kicking about here or there, particularly given that several of the hags will have moved north for one reason or another to try and disrupt the potential of threats coming from the north, particularly if they themselves have begun to mutate. There's one thing that's brought up a couple of times in the realm of the Ice Queen, is that several of the that they deal with mutation. They know that mutants occur. They know that it might not be anybody's fault. They don't do what they do in the Empire, where they presume that mutation means a corruption of the soul. Definitely. What it means is you're beginning to corrupt, and your soul may corrupt. So what they do is they try to train them, use them, and get them sent north as soldiers as fast as possible. And that includes if it happens to themselves. One of the call-out characters was a hag who had started to develop mutations but didn't want to go, which is why she was the call-out character, because she was doing so much work to try and stop chaos. She felt that if she stopped, no one would take her place. So yeah, I reckon there's probably a couple of them kicking around up there, but I don't think that they would be Norscan per se, or Norse per se.
Yeah. That being said, like Total War obviously doesn't demonstrate it because it's a war game. The whole point is to fight with armies, and there need to be consistent themes within those armies. But Norskins are not a monolith. In fact, many Norskins don't use the term Norskin because it's like the continent. It's not a country. And they don't see eye to eye with each other. But there are Norse cults that have held on more to their ancestry, as far as they were not originally. They have always worshipped gods that some Southlings would not agree with, but not all of the Norse ones were full on like chaos worshippers. And many that exist in the North are far more peaceful and are willing to work with other factions. Like there are Norse tribes that trade with the Norscan dwarfs, and the Norscan dwarves will not trade with the really chaosy ones.
Yeah. One thing to remember about the Norse is that they're, to begin with, a relatively tragic tribe, so to speak, in that the Norse were driven north by Sigmar. They refused to join Sigmar in his great campaigns.
Yeah, he genocided the shit out of them.
So he genocided the shit out of them during his rule, and he pushed them out into the sea, out into Kislev, pushed them through the Ungauls. Many of them had to sail north and go over towards the frigid north. They went there because they were forced there by the Empire. But they had their own gods, their own views, and eventually the sheer reality of their situation meant that the further north their peoples went, the more they realized that there were certain powers up there that if you did not pay heed, they did not suffer you to exist. The good old chaos gods are not the happiest of people. So practicality alone meant that many of them worshipped the chaos gods, but not worship. It was more appease them. You got to remember what the whole worship thing means, but the chaos gods liked worship. So there was a bit of a call when they moved from trying to appease them to those that started outright worshipping jealous gods. And that's when it all went quite wrong for the Norse.
This is more a question for you than me, because I was not around then.
No, not really. No, the Norse, I mean, all the way back in 3rd edition, I would say, rather than 4th. If you take a look at what they did with Manowar, where they basically just made them Vikings again, and if you take a look at the army lists that were in 3rd edition, in the what was the name of the book? I'm looking at it. It's over there. 3rd edition army book. Anyway, I can't remember what it is. They're basically just Vikings. And they don't so much, as I recall, directly call them out. They give them a slight name twist here or there, but it's really weak. But you've got to remember that those editions of Warhammer were actually created for people to play with their war game miniatures. So you'll find that their Cathaeans were just Japanese models. Their Vikings were Viking models. Their Holy Roman Empire models were used for the Empire. And then they were really awesome because they could also take their Lord of the Rings models, their orcs and their elves, or their whole Melnibonian range that Citadel made. They could take those and say that they're high elves. So the whole foundation of the Warhammer world was nothing more than taking models from the real world and dropping them in. So there's an awful lot of real world gods slippage into the early products because, well, it's not slippage. They were just using that. And then, bang, they created the Warhammer world, which took all of the models from all of the different war game ranges, dropped it in its own world and said, yeah, but now it's this. But you can still use those, but now it's this. And they started twisting all of the names over time. And it in particular became a real thing with the dawning of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, where they then detailed it all.
Yeah. That was weird. Your mic got muffled for a second, but it sorted itself out.
Stinking mic.
Yeah, it's fine now. But yes. Davy Jones, insert always has been meme.
Yes.
If you go all the way back to 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the Realms of Chaos or Tone of Corruption, there's a whole chapter, Norskins, that goes very in depth. That a lot of the southern Norsca can be very loosely divided into northern and southern tribes. The southern tribes are not what you would call like evil. They are far more open to trade, and a lot of Norskins live in like Marienburg and Altdorf, and they're like all over the place. Yep. And they're big guys, but they're welcome members of society as long as they're not overt chaos worshippers. a lot of people will tolerate them, or even like them, because they'll bring really exotic materials from like whaling on the ocean, or from certain other areas. So yeah, there are good guy Norskins all over the place. You could easily play one in Wolfrup. It's awesome.
Oh yeah, totally. They're a proper character concept. The Tome of Corruption was a book that I was deeply involved with, and the addition of all the Norscan culture in there was an important part. It wasn't chaos sorcerers that were added; it was Victes that were added, those that appease the gods. And yeah, worth having a look at. The Tome of Corruption, relatively easy book or PDF to go find if you wish to do so, because it gives quite a lot of detail about Norscan society that's always certainly going to be overwritten at various points, but it's still a really good thing to look at and get an idea of what the Warhammer world's like.
Yeah, even in Total War, like there's a reason your shamans do not wield the chaos lores; they wield the regular lores of magic, and it's because like they're not full on chaos sorcerers. It's more complex than that. Okay, we got to start firing through these. Do hags make elementals like Arabian Jinn? That's them. No, they work with spirits. Now, if you were fighting a hag on the battlefield and she called upon the spirits to defend her, could it look like an elemental comes up and attacks you? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, perfect.
What is a hag spell preparation for their curses like? And the hags, okay, so we answered the second part, but yeah, what does their spell prep look like?
Okay, so their preparations tend to be particular ingredients that they need to get, which require special ingredients that are caught under certain circumstances. So their spell preparation involves, to begin with, preparing their ingredients, and their ingredients can sometimes be very difficult to organize. Once they've got those, they then need to attract the spirits to them, which is what the ingredients are for. That helps the spirits come, and then they manipulate the spirits directly using the equivalent of what other witches would refer to as channeling. Channeling is nothing more than your ability to effectively imagine your hands reach out and grab the winds of magic and fuck it about a bit. That's what your channeling's doing. And it's your ability to change and move the winds of magic. They don't move the winds of magic. Instead, they use the same skill to do that to spirits. And they use that to manipulate the spirits into doing what they want. Some spirits will not like this. Some spirits are more than happy to do this because it's in their nature. Other spirits are sort of happy to do it because they've been told to, because there's deals in place, because they've been appeased in some fashion. Often the ingredient is nothing more than a method of appeasing the spirit so that it can be manipulated by the witch.
Yep. I'm just gonna fire off very, very few little things here of like, could you have Krakadrak dwarf units as a subfaction Total War? They could, yes. Do I think it's ever gonna happen? No. I think there's too many like bigger dwarf things they have to deal with first. I wish the Strigani were that lucky. If you mean the sense that they're like playable or expanded upon, they are. You just got to look in the right books. But Strigani often feature very heavily as like really fascinating NPCs in a lot of the little adventures, and those can give you cool ideas for character creation. You can absolutely make an awesome Strigani character. John Lacole, I heard that the Ancient Mother, I think you mean the
they're all largely
is involved in the ice witches. Is she also involved in the hags? Potentially. We've touched on that. Potentially, it's complicated.
The answer is yes and no.
Yeah. How much would a thing in the woods chuck? Okay. Thank you. What are those things pulling Ostankia's sled? They are the things in the wood. John Lacole. So they are the things in the wood which are representative of like terrifying spirit creatures. Though the actual origin is from Mordheim, and they have some really cool models and art if you want to go look at that. Wohi 3, who do the hags worship, and where do their souls go when they die?
I think that's just a general Warhammer question, and the answer is there's a pantheon of gods that will be not worshipped but appeased as needed, and their souls go to wherever souls go when they die. There is no definitive answer on that one, but it is worth saying that the god Mor is not worshipped in Kislev in the same way that he is worshipped in the rest of the old world.
Yeah, is it just Mor? Or is there a different death god in Kislev? I've never heard of a death god.
No, there's not. There's specifically not. It is no matter. The Kislevites have a very different view on death.
That's fair. Yeah, that whole little song from the Star Wars Warhammer 3, which weirdly enough is a song to Daz. Which also, Realm of the Ice Queen, you can read the entire song, which is also excellent. The song from the Total War Warhammer 3 trailer is literally only like the last 4 lines. It's like 20 lines long.
No.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Naratio. Appreciate the question. But answer's no.
Awesome.
Daddy Bear, what's a good novel to learn and read about hags? Sigmar Trilogy?
No, I wouldn't say it's a good novel to learn about hags. It's a good novel to learn about a hag. I'd say if you're wanting to learn about them, just grab Realm of the Ice Queen. It's probably your best option.
Yep, it's got a whole like chapter on hags. It's great.
Yeah, it does.
The Omnissiah, how do the hags and ice witches coexist? Not well.
with friction.
Yeah. Just like how like the colleges of magic and the cults of Sigmar do. They not well. Is Lore of Hags the new Kislev lore just a mixture of Olgu, Shaiish, and Gur? Is that how it might be represented in game at the moment? Possibly.
Yeah, we'll see.
Should it be its own separate lore? Yes.
Yes.
Bruh, thank you for the question.
Yep.
Prince Baron, where do the hags believe that Kislev ends? Are they an expansionist faction, or do they stay focused in a specific area? Are there, oh god, where's the rest of this question? Are there parts of Kislev that they don't believe is theirs?
Right, so that's actually a really good one, because we're now talking about the old Ungol lands rather than necessarily Kislev as it currently stands. And the Ungols used to rule all from Prague, Erengrad, up for about halfway the distance up to the up to Norska, and around about a little bit of the distance to the south. Ostland used to spread right out into what is modern day Kislev, and Ostermark used to go right across over towards the opposite side. So if you're looking at what the hags believe is the area that they protect, it's a large area around the Prague-Erengrad divide. That's where they are. There's Ungols quite far south, and entire Stanistas villages down there of Ungols, and they are primarily Ungols. It's only the cities where everyone sort of mixes. Out in the communities, their individual ethnicities tend to stick with their own, with the occasional outlier here or there. So loosely speaking, a good chunk of Kislev and a good chunk of what people would see as troll country.
Yep. On minis, I can 100% guarantee you that the small dog creatures are the thing in the woods. They might, that's their original name. They might not pluralize it because they weren't meant to be a unit. They were individual creatures. But if you look at some models that were created by Games Workshop back in the day to represent them, they didn't sell them, but they were like a kit bash. They're practically identical to the Total War model, where they're missing the skull and stuff. The big thing is called an incarnate elemental of beast. It doesn't have, if they gave it another name, its other name would be the Bloody Hidesman. It wouldn't, a thing in the woods is not what you would call an incarnate elemental of Gur.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Is Ostenkia, okay, this is a gameplay question. We don't know yet. We're waiting for more details from Creative Assembly. Stay tuned. But Deadass, thank you for the question. Cincinnati. What is the purpose or plan of the hags in the world? Do they obey the ancient widow? Do they care about the land the same way the wood elves do?
So I'm keeping this super short. What's the purpose of the plan of the hags in the world to survive? Do they obey the ancient widow? Obey is such a heavy word, and I think the answer would be no. They would respect the ancient widow. It's a completely different thing. Do they care about the land? Yes. The same way that wood elves do. The wood elves are insane. So I would say in a different way, but wood elves, they're proper special.
Yeah, the thing a lot of people I think misunderstand about the wood elves is they think the wood elves are guardians of like they're just tree huggers. They're just nature elves. That's not true. They have formed a pact with Athel Loren, but Athel Loren is an entity. It thinks. It has its own objectives. It is a weird, like, it protects what is called the weave, but the weave is not the exact same thing as nature. There are a lot of similarities, but the weave it's different. It's complicated. We don't have time to get into it.
Weird ass elves. That's what they are.
we don't have time to get into it. The answer is no. Repo Man has confiscated Mother Ostunkia's RV. Yep, thank you. And there's no lore of hags. Andy, would you like to retract your excitement about what is being done with the hags?
No, I'm generally speaking really happy because they exist. They're there. I mean, the alternative would be there would be no hags.
Yeah.
You know, so no, I think it's great that they're in there. I spent a lot of time trying to make them make sense within the world, and it's lovely to see that other people have come in with a completely different framework because they're stymied by what the game can allow, and they've managed to create a lovely version of them. Are they the same? No, but they don't have to be the same.
Yeah. Infiltrator of Troy, appreciate the question, even if it's very negative. But it's like,
No,
just because things are not implemented in the best possible way does not mean that it's trash. It just means it's different.
Yeah.
That's life. Sometimes you gotta roll with it, guys. Mila, when the hags cast spells from the lore hags, I think we've already answered this. Spirits. This answer to the most questions. Spirits.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. It's such a casual term.
It's today's version of elf bullshit. It's just spirits. How does one become a hag? Is it decided at birth, or does one choose to become a hag later in life?
Yeah, one doesn't choose to become a hag, sadly. Right, it's pretty simple. I'll run through it as quickly as I can. Children who have the sight are taken into the rota where the wise ones are. You can only be a wise man if you have the sight, and if you have the sight, you can see the spirits. You can also see, once you've been a wise one for some time, chaos that lies within the hearts of others. So you have your wise ones, and they're the ones that lead the community from one aspect, from their little circle. Some of them will go further. Some of them will be picked out. Some of them will suffer a tragedy. Some of them will effectively be the witches amongst them, and they will become the next generation of hag witches. And none of them really want to be. Most of those who've got the sight do not want to become hag witches because it's horrific.
Yep. Yeah, you lose your life.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just imagine you're sitting there. Just to give you an example, you're a 25-year-old woman with a husband and 2 children, and you're a part of the Wise One Circle. You've been part of the Wise One Circle since you were 14, and then on your 26th birthday, the spirits come. On your 26th birthday, you look 41, and you come out and see your husband, and he looks at you and goes, "What's happened?" And then you have to have that conversation. The spirits have come. I'm now one of the witches. I'm one of the old witches. And then 4 years later, she looks 60. Her entire life has changed. Her husband now is confused as to what's happened. Nobody wants to become these, but it is a cost that they have to pay.
Yep. So thank you for the good old Warhammer. Siegfried KKP, thank you for the question. KFCID, are hags strictly Ungol, or can they be gospel guards as well? We answered that. Yeah. AV Pextreme. Yeah. Have the hags or even Mother Ostenka ever left their homeland to assist the Empire, Dwarfs, Bretonnia, etc., or are they strictly on protecting their homeland?
They are a pretty localized group, but just like any force of Kislev, they will at times move beyond borders for whatever reason that is required for. There is always extenuating circumstances that mean people go beyond where they ever want to be.
Yep. Also, maybe a stupid question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Are the hags and Ostenka associated with Kislev herself? Like, would they worship her instead of the typical pantheon?
And I would say that the word worship is misapplied in all cases.
Yeah. Which is a very easy thing for everyone to fall into, because the way in our world that we handle gods and worship and stuff is just not really how it works in Warhammer.
Yeah. If you want to give an idea of what it's like, go take a check at, say, Roman or Greek uses of gods and try to get a grasp of how they're worshipped, because they're not worshipped.
Doompig, when the hags take on the form of the Ancient Widow, are they cursing themselves? Also, given that the form they take on is horrifying, what even is the Ancient Widow physically or otherwise?
Fucking horrific. There you go. Are they cursing themselves? That's an interesting way of putting it. They're definitely taking on the form of a great spiritual entity that you really don't necessarily want sitting inside you. The cost is almost certainly going to be a part of their life. That's going to be a part of their bargain. They're going to come out of it probably older, more bent, more in pain. What else can you say? It would be pretty horrible.
Oh, here's an interesting question. Garvasius, what happens if a young woman attempts to refuse the spirits or ignore them? What would happen?
They would plague her, and the wise woman circle would very much advise them against it. Plus, you've got to realize that they almost always come to a wise woman, someone who has been prepared all of her life for this to occur. They hope it doesn't, but they're ready. It is their spiritual duty to do it. Does that mean they like it? No. Does that mean they're going to rail against it? Possibly. Does that mean they'll walk away from their people? It's unlikely. It's a really difficult cultural pressure that they'll be under to actually do what needs to be done. Plus, the spirits are vengeful.
Has a hag ever managed to keep a husband, or are they all doomed to be forever alone?
Many of them will be doomed. I mean, it's the reason that they're attached to the Ancient Widow. And it's not just the... I mean, many of the hags come because they lose their husbands and they become so much closer to the Ancient Widow that they suddenly, the spirits come to them. But are they doomed? No, they're as doomed as any relationship. I mean, people are people. Many of their relationships will be doomed. Some of them will manage to survive regardless. People are complicated. And the only answer to that is it depends on the people involved.
Yep. Castraded, who would... I'm skipping this question. Thank you, Castraded. We are
castrated, really.
I will say the only issue I have with your question is that if you're gonna have a battle of gilfs, it should be Hellebron versus Mother Ostankia, not Marathi versus... That would be the battle of the horrifying old ladies. Jesus. Second bout of insanity. Yeah. Are there any links between the Kislevite wilds and the forest and hags and the face tree spirits of Athalord and related places?
Yes.
Yeah. Spirits be spirits.
The spirits be spirits, plus the world roots extend to where pretty much every forest in the world. So loosely speaking, yes.
Mason Jack, how cute is Quick Head Taker? Unrelated. He's adorable. Diego Assassin, what would happen if the hags found a boy that was gifted? Yep.
It's horrendous, but
poor boys. There's a boy crisis in Magic.
That's one of their few hard lines. They don't like letting mutants live. But some hags have a network where they allow mutants to survive. They train them and send them out. But male wizards, it's basically it's like finding a Chaos Marauder in your camp.
Ratwood, are the children of hags treated with reverence or other special types of treatment because their mothers became hags?
No. They're just children. An unfortunate side effect of that is that in Magic in the Warhammer world is almost certainly genetic, and that the ability to do it almost certainly is. So it means that children of powerful an older hag witches almost certainly are going to become them in time. And I think that a very nice character would be a potential hag witch that was born a hag witch. That would be a really fun character, born old and wizened, and then has magic from birth. But yeah, no, nothing special unless they turn special later.
Yeah, this is actually technically not true. It's not revealed in most sources what happens to boys. They are taken, but they are not killed. Though there is a short story that is fantastic that reveals what potentially becomes of them, and they are known as the Sons of Bretonia. And they are super badass. They are like terrifying, gifted warriors that ride on kelpies, and it's a unit I want really badly until we're Warhammer.
Yeah, cut a long story short, no.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so the rest of these I didn't have time to put in here, so I'll just have to read out loud. Infiltrator of Troy and the Old Lord, what did the Hags do? Oh, yeah, this is actually a great question. What did the Hags do when the Gospodars invaded Kislev? So when the Ice Witches showed up under Queen Mishka, why didn't they help fight back?
They did.
Yeah, they lost.
Yeah, they lost. The Ice Witches were horrendous. You've got to think of them as what they actually were at that point, which is a stupendously powerful fighting force that had been working for the several generations to arrive at Kislev. They had been fighting against the worst Chaos Marauders, the worst Orc tribes, the worst Hobgoblin tribes that were out there, and had survived. A people that were so stubborn that they'd somehow not fallen to chaos. Perhaps they'd been protected by Mother Kislev itself. And they arrived, they kicked ass, they chewed gum, and no one could stop them. The Empire was similarly defeated. The Kislev could have continued fighting, but it chose to stop at its borders. The borders of Kislev, where Mother Kislev herself sat. That was where they stopped. They didn't stop because they were losing. They stopped because they'd reached where they needed to go. They defeated the Empire in multiple battles. Ostland and Ostermark were crushed.
Yep. Some other we talked about Arianka earlier in the stream. You can
Yes, we did.
I will do my damnedest to add timestamps afterwards.
Good luck with that.
Sorry guys.
Oh, you have to tell me how to do timestamps. I still don't know how to do it.
It's super easy. I'll tell you after.
Yeah, thanks, you rock.
Are hags as powerful as elves? It would depend on the hag. And it's
how long's a piece of string?
Yeah, power comparisons are weird and fancy. It's not,
yeah, they really are.
It's a tempting exercise. I get it. We all love who would wins, but it's when you're looking at it from a genuine lore perspective, it's really complicated really fast.
I'll add a different answer to that, and that is that hags have an advantage that many spellcasters don't have, and that's time.
Yeah. What would happen if the Ancient Widow were to be destroyed? I'm going to say that instead of die. Would the hags lose their powers? I would say probably not, because their powers come from the spirits, not the Ancient Widow.
Yeah, indeed. And their ability to manipulate the spirits does not come from the Ancient Widow. It's an actual skill that you can learn as a spellcaster. Yeah.
Now, she might have originally taught them how to do it way back in the day or something. Who knows? But yeah.
I think it's more likely the Ungolics developed it themselves, realizing that how dangerous that chaos was. It's a cultural thing.
I guess it'd be better to say the Ancient Widow could very well just be the most powerful of the spirits that they bargained with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good line.
Okay, Shin, love you, buddy. None of these questions have anything to do with hags, so we're gonna skip them. Appreciate it though.
Sorry, dude.
Yeah, half crown. Because the lore of hags and the lore of the Great Maw are both very ingredient-focused ritual practices, could hags ever gain access to the lore of the Great Maw?
No.
That's a really funny question.
But no.
Yeah, remember,
no gastromancy for them.
Gastromancy comes from the Great Maw. Like it's a relationship there. If you don't have the Great Maw's attention, it doesn't care about you. And it that being said, could a non-human learn gastromancy? That's a really fun thing. I would say it's probably possible, but not easy. There is a very intrinsic relationship between the Great Maw and the ogres that was caused by the Great Maw's creation. It was a feedback loop. Could an ogre female become a hag under the right circumstances? Also from Half Crown.
That's one of those ones where you go, no, but in that it's not a natural outcome given the nature of ogres and the nature of the type of people that they are. I just can't see it happening. But I'm sure a story could be written where it did.
It would require very specific circumstances.
It would require really specific circumstances. So my gut instinct is, don't be daft. And then, but I'm like, I could write that. I could make that work.
Yeah, ogres, they're not stupid. They think different from us, so we think they're stupid, but they are not stupid.
They just have very different brains because they don't have imagination as we understand it. They don't. They're just different.
They got a really intense case of aphantasia. Ogres are only stupid if you apply a human set of intelligence.
I'm also going to call out this comment in particular. It's not just that they're uneducated. You can try to educate an ogre, but there are certain things that ogres just will not get. In the same way that there are certain aspects to magic that humans will not get, because there's certain aspects to the sight they just don't have. They see differently to, say, the elves or to the slan. So they're just different. They will excel in certain areas and be far better than us in a whole variety of things. But equally, we do them in others.
There you go, ogre hack. She eats, it just eats something with a spirit in it.
That's pretty much on it. Well done.
Saint Snowmad, if Kislev is getting the incarnate elemental of beast, what factions could the other incarnate elementals go to? What would those elementals be like? Okay, so we only received battle profiles for 3 of them, which were beast, fire, and death. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay has since added life to the equation with artwork and like a profile and rules and stuff. And then we have a lot of hints and stories and legends about what light and metal are like. We have no idea what shadow and whoever I'm missing heavens are like. We don't know what those two are like at all. They've never even been vaguely described. That being said, I would be shocked if we got all of them. I think it's likely we will get the 3 from the original books. I would personally put death and fire in a Araby faction if we ever got them. I think Araby would be awesome with incarnate elementals.
I'd put all of them in there.
Well, yeah, that's fair. As far as like, it just, you can technically they can go anywhere where that faction has that kind of wizard, and it would not be inappropriate for them to be there. because they're literally just manifestations of those winds. Thank you for the question. Let's see. Islington, what if any are the links between the Famir and the Hags? None. We talked about that. Shen, would Mother Ostenkia start in a magical forest? We don't know yet. I could absolutely see Mother Ostenkia being in a magical forest. That would make sense. They're very spirit heavy, so yeah, that would make sense. Infiltrator of Choi, Sotek compared the women that gave Garion / Azazel the advice on how to betray Sigmar to an Uncle Hag witch. Was she actually an Uncle Hag witch? No, she was just a witch. She doesn't actually involve herself with spirits. She has her relationship to the Unburigan tribe is very similar to a Uncle Hag witch's relationship to many of the people that will live around her, is how I would say that. It's a cultural equivalent. The elemental incarnate of the deeps is just the Necrofax Colossus. I mean, technically you could argue that any vampiric creature is just an incarnate elemental of that lore of vampires, and you're not technically wrong, but you're also not technically right, because it's not that wind manifesting itself into a physical shape. It is you taking magic and putting it into something that's already there. Would be my argument. And I don't even know if you could have an elemental incarnate of the invented lores. I don't think you could, but maybe you could. I don't know. That'd be weird. You could, maybe. It would probably be really nightmarish, though. I would not want to see an incarnate elemental lore of vampires. No, thank you. Literally just be Nagash. Keplum, when exactly were the Hags using all those enslaved, tainted / mutant Kislevites they gather up for? Could their deaths in the Hag rituals feed the ancient widows, similar to sacrifices to the chaos gods?
Yes, they could, but that depends entirely on the nature of that spirit, and that has yet to be actually defined.
There you go. Then Keblum, what did the ancient widow's husband do? Men are too emotional to wield magic. Prophecies about the ruination of Kislev's magic by a male using her magic, granting hand magic to some women when they become widows, a land frozen eternal ice. Just what the hell did that man do?
And that is a beautiful question that deserves to be answered. I specifically set that one up myself. There's a reason that she's called the Widow. It's not just because, it's a nice name. There's definitely a story there that's not been plumbed. And is that attached to other stories in the area? Perhaps. I imagine someone at some point will attempt to answer it.
Yeah, I that's a awesome question to explore, because
I think so.
There's a lot potentially there of, like, in some ways with all the ice and everything, it's like, oh, it could be lost. But then when you think about how much she exiles men, it almost seems like there was something almost more abusive going on. And
doesn't sound good, does it?
Yeah. That being said, I did love somebody's comment earlier that the Widowmaker of Cain may have also been involved. That's spicy, and I really like that. But it would probably be, if it ever got written, I would really hope it was an incredibly convoluted, crazy story with multiple interpretations that there's no true answer to. And that it's just wild. Like, every version of it should be wild.
I think the correct way of answering it is the way that there's a while ago I had an interview with Lawrence Schnecht, and he's the High Lore Master over on Elder Scrolls, and he also did Baldur's Gate 3. And he has a very, very clean version of how lore should be presented, and it's always presented from the perspective of someone inside the setting. That means that it can be at all times contradictory, but fine for that individual, which means if you're going to answer this particular story, you don't write it in an army book and say, back in the year XXX, this occurred, this god did this god did this, big story. Ooh! What you do instead is you have somebody explain the story to somebody else. It's an in-world story, and it's their understanding of what occurred, and you can answer it perfectly. But that doesn't mean that someone else on the other town, just 20 miles down the river, thinks that they've got a completely different answer. And I think that's the best way to answer it, that one, because that allows for multiple interpretations.
Yep. All right. But that is all of them. We actually got through them all this time.
Holy shit, we did it. Fuck me.
We're hugely over time.
That happens.
That's all right. What's the Cult of Ulrich's view on hags? Probably not great.
Cult of, well, no, actually, the Cult of Ulrich is a cult that's very much about self-reliance. It's a cult about being responsible. It's a cult about doing your own thing, and not needing to rely upon the strength of others. It's your own individual strength. I think the cult would have no problems. They have enough problems as it is. Well, I'll give you an example. In Kislev, they have no talking priests, as they refer to them. There's no cult. There's no part of the howling wolf aspect to it. There are no priests of Ulrich. They are only represented by the White Company. That's the Templars of Ulrich. Because as far as they're concerned, talk is just a waste of time. And the I think they and the hags would get on fine.
Man, I can't wait for when they inevitably add warrior priests of Ulrich into Total War.
I do love the Cult of Ulrich. I have written a lot about the good old Cult of Ulrich.
Is the Ancient Widow the first hag? Who knows? Also, to the Widowmaker comment earlier, the fact that many of the brides of Cain, when they become powerful enough, are called hags.
There's something in there. The more I think of it, the more it makes me want to write a thing.
Yeah,
you get excited about things. You're like, ooh.
Yeah, honestly, the more I'm there's some interesting connecting threads there that are not loose. That's interesting. Is there a cult of positive masculine traits? Is there a Knuff cult?
Yes, lots of them. But we're not dealing with cults here. We're dealing with magic. And sadly, in Kislev, magic and men do not get on very well. But that's because we're dealing with Kislev. If we go to the Empire, many of the magical traditions are male-dominated for a variety of reasons.
All right, but we are out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you had fun.
I did.
We got a lot out of that, and it was a really, really good time. So, like I've said earlier, if you have not already, please, for the love of God, go subscribe to LAWhammer on Twitch and YouTube. Also, check out Rookery Publications. There should be a bot that's constantly posting that shit everywhere.
That bot rocked, by the way. You should pay attention to it.
Yeah, poor Nightbot is working his ass off. But on YouTube, you should be able to see links down below. If not, you can just type it in the search bar. They're easy to find. So LAWhammer, Rookery Publications. Rookery is coming back this.
It's not. I think it's the Saturday after. I'll ping you next Sunday. I'll give you the first dates at the end of the stream. Okay.
Yeah. So here I will post the. I will actually.
Those look
links.
at that.
There you go.
Look at those things. They're on the screen. So you know what each one is. LAWhammer is me talking about role-playing games in the Warhammer world, playing games, because I can't help myself. I'm going to be playing Total War as well. And is a variety of occasional lore streams. I'm doing most of them over here.
Thank you, Hawk.
Fun. Over on the other side with at the Rookery, that's where we talk to people from across the games industry about game shit, and we've had everyone from Andy Hall, who most of you know, to various Games Workshop writers, to just roleplay writers and artists et al. And finally, Twitch at LAWhammer, just my Twitch stream. Get over there. Go subscribe. Why haven't you done it already? I've been sitting here for hours talking away about stuff.
Yeah, and hey, 5,000
there's loads
subs.
of you out there. If you want to subscribe right now, I could do a dance.
You dance anyway, Andy. Don't.
Yeah, you're right.
You can't offer things you give away for free. Yeah, if you get LAWhammer gets to 5K subs, I will put out Queek.
Ooh.
Yeah, I've already.
Come on. I want to see it too.
Y'all been waiting for like 3 or 4 years. I think it's been 4 years at this point. It'll happen. It'll happen. I've actually been feeling good and getting a lot of writing done lately. But in any event, yep. Make sure you go watch the LAWhammer series every Friday. Awesome. A lot of cool stuff. And you already know my shit, so I'm not going to plug my own crap. Anywho.
But you should, go do his crap too.
Yeah, sure. Anywho, we're out of here. We'll see. Next vote. We're alternating them, so it'll be on my channel this time.
Well,
for the vote. I don't know what's going to be on there yet. We'll figure it out. So make sure you drop by the community tab to vote. Thank you all for watching.
You rock.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.